Hello, and welcome to Jason Cavness Experience. I'm your host, Jason Cavness. Here at Cavness HR, we're doing a crowdfunding campaign on the WeFunder platform. To learn more how to become an early investor and, of course, the risk, go to https://wefunder.com/CavnessHR. Our guest today is Shannon Polson. Shannon, you ready to be great today?
I'm ready to be great.
Shannon, starting off, talk about growing up in Alaska as a young girl. First of all, were you the only child or you had brothers and sisters?
No, I was the eldest. Surprising nobody that knows me, but yeah, I was the eldest of three.
So what is it like growing up there? And was it in Anchorage, Fairbanks, or some random remote?
Yeah, I grew up just on the outside of Anchorage, and so the rest of Alaska doesn't consider that Alaska, of course, but it was plenty Alaska.
So that's too cityfied.
Yeah, too cityfied, exactly. I think they call it the LA of the LA of Alaska, so half the population is there. But no, I think it was. I'm really incredibly grateful for the opportunity to grow up so close to wilderness and really loving wilderness, and having a sense too that we had to be able to take care of ourselves. I think that's something that everybody that grows up in Alaska really internalizes.
So I guess even growing up in the LA of Alaska, you had no choice but to be like an outdoorsy type person, right?
Well, there's people that are not, but I think Alaska would probably be sort of miserable if you weren't at least somewhat outdoorsy. But yeah, I was lucky. My dad took us out hiking through the mountains, through the Chugach, and we still spend quite a bit of time up at Denali now, which is a wonderful place that we ended up with a cabin later in my life. So
what are some fond memories growing up like in that type of lifestyle?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's one, I think let me talk about this in a book. I can't remember actually if I've written this out or not, but I remember hiking up at Willowa Lakes, and Willowa Lakes is behind Willowa Peaks in the Chugach Range, just outside of Anchorage. And I remember that we were camping with our dog, Peaches, and it was a little golden retriever, and her paws had been all cut up on the shale because it was probably 6 or 8 miles back to where we camped. And we had one of these McKinley tents that had a pole that went straight up and then kind of came down on each side. And Willowa means wind in Alaska. And so in the middle of the night and in the middle of the summer, so it only was dark for a couple of hours, the wind picked up. And I remember in the middle of the night, the pole that went straight up through the tent just ripped down, and the tent was just flapping and shrieking like a bunch of banshees. It was totally terrifying, actually. And we ended up having to pack up in the middle of the night, and then we were hiking out, and then Peaches had her paws all cut on the shale of the Chugach, which is all shale rock. And my dad ended up putting the dog in his backpack, and it will be a camping trip that I remember forever.
And you go back and visit regularly?
We go back usually in August. We spend the month of August at our cabin in Denali, typically.
And is your family still up there?
My father and stepmother died. That's the subject of my first book, North of Hope. And my mother is still up there in Anchorage. So, okay. And we have a cabin that belonged to my father and stepmother that's up at Denali. So that's where we spend most of our time now.
Okay. So before we go any further, I want to tell everyone how we met. So, I have no concept of time anymore, but I think like a year ago, you spoke at a conference at the Boeing Museum of Flight.
Yes, yeah. That's right.
Yeah,
okay.
That my friend Carrie Jeter put on, and you, some other like outstanding female aviation leaders did a talk, right? Can you talk about like how that came about, like how do you met Carrie and like how the whole thing did? Because all y'all get such wonderful speeches. Like, man, y'all did some amazing stuff back in the day and still do amazing things,
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm glad you reminded me of that too. No, that was a fabulous panel. Carrie did an amazing job putting that together. I don't even know how we all connected. I think we all do this kind of work and then we end up connecting online or on LinkedIn or on some other platform. Carrie was, and maybe still is, representing Meryl Tengestal and her awesome book, Shatter the Sky. She was the first Black woman U-2 pilot. And Eileen was there, and I think there was another woman that called in. But yeah, that was a fantastic panel, and it really has been a lot of fun because I don't remember the specifics of how I even met Carrie, but I think we just met online doing the work that we're doing, which is really promoting leadership and women in leadership and speaking about our experiences relative to that to be able to help companies also then bring up their leadership teams just as a successful.
Yeah, it's just amazing how all y'all like no one's speech was way better than the other. It was like the same level. Like, man, this is like outstanding. It's like almost like y'all teamed up together. Like, don't outshine everyone. They want to do an A+ level speech, because all the good,
Yeah, it was a fabulous panel. I mean, just incredible. And Eileen Borkman is this incredibly, just unbelievable experience as an aviator and as an engineer. And so I think we all complemented each other really well in that that panel.
I know two things I really remember hit me like, and it's it's like kind of bad, but like the one lady, the retired colonel that works in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Told a story like at least once a month, someone asked her to go get like security passes, some bullshit like that.
Right.
Like, are you freaking kidding right now? Like,
do you know who she is?
Like,
do you know? Yeah.
You're kidding me right now.
That's right.
Like that's common sense, you think this lady's kind of, she's not, it's kind of older, and I'm sure she carries her personal matter. Like, just can you get my pass for me? Like, and for her to have the patience to deal with that, like I couldn't be me, right? I'll be flaming people, I think. And
that happens all the time for women.
Yeah,
and
it's unfortunate, right?
It is. It really is. I think that is something that has been really evident to me over the years of doing this work is, there's initially some reluctance because as military, we think of ourselves as a team. We don't think of ourselves as individuals, and women tend to not tell their stories, not share their stories as much. And realizing how important it is that we do share these stories and share the stories of others in all of these incredible leaders, men and women, because at the end of the day, we all need to contribute our best selves, but these stories aren't out there enough where people understand what everybody can contribute. And that's where it really becomes important.
And then remember, I think the black lady's name is Meryl.
Meryl, yeah.
I remember first time she said was like, I can tell you for a fact, the earth is not flat. I know for a fact, I've seen it with my own eyes, the earth is not flat.
From a U2, right? Yeah, exactly. No, she's fabulous. I absolutely love Meryl. She's been a great person to continue to develop a friendship with. So what
is there an actual community, like, former aviation military females? Is there like a community out there somewhere, like on Facebook or LinkedIn, where y'all like her notes and stuff or something like that?
There's not. I mean, it kind of it's a good idea, wouldn't it?
That's surprising.
There's a group of, I think, Air Force and Navy fighter pilot women that I have heard about, but not for all of us. And I guess, we Army people, we always get left out, right?
Yeah, I know.
No, that's not true. I've actually loved meeting all of these women across the services, which again, I hadn't had a chance to meet when I was in. It was too early, and there were a few of us scattered around, but we weren't really connected, and there wasn't the internet, right? There wasn't that thing in the 90s.
And so talk about networking a little bit, like Carrie invited me to the group thing. I met a lot of people like you and other people on the panel, right?
Yeah.
And this thing, if I were to take the opportunity, if I say, I got time for that BS, right? No word. But I went and I met you on the podcast,
right?
Who knew that can come from this? Like all the different people you meet and stuff, you got to put yourself out there, right?
You do have to put yourself out there, right? And that is, at the end of the day, every person has gifts to contribute to this world, and the world needs us all to give our best. And so the only way that the world knows that you're out there is if you get out there.
Yeah.
And that can be uncomfortable for a lot of us, but I think it's something that we either have to push to overcome or continue to overcome each day.
So how do you convince or influence someone to, hey, put yourself out there? I know you're scared or whatever. You don't want to, you think you're not good enough or whatever, but actually, put yourself out there and just see what happens.
I think you just, at the end of the day, it's something each one of us has to do, right? Each one of us has to make that decision to do it. But if I'm talking to somebody, I'll just say, look, the world needs your gifts. The world needs you to be able to give your absolute best. And so if you hold back, the world doesn't get that, right? And we don't collectively benefit from all it is that you have to give to the world. And so I think that helps to kind of reframe it a little bit and say, we're contributing, we're all finding ways to contribute and to give our absolute best. And if that's the case, you got to put yourself out there so that you can give your best.
So you go up to Alaska, you decide to go to Duke. Why Duke versus like Stanford or Cal, or the, fine institutions on the West Coast, even the middle of America? Why Duke?
I think also surprising nobody that knows me well, I wanted to get as far away from home as possible.
That's understandable. You was like a 17, 18, 19-year-old lady, That's totally understandable.
Out, right. And I was, my parents were divorced. That was a really tough thing for me to deal with, although I tended to just not deal with it and do other things instead. But I just wanted to get out and to get away. Duke ended up being probably not the best cultural fit for me, but is probably one of the reasons that I ended up in ROTC and connecting to that community pretty well. So I think at the end of the day, as I look back over those different decisions, you start to see how those paths start to build on each other. And I'm grateful for it. But it was as big of a culture shock as I have ever had in my life to go from Alaska.
How for your parents and other people when you said, I'm going to Duke?
Pretty surprised. I remember somebody saying, just to show you kind of what the mindset was when I went in the 80s, and still is sometimes, is like, oh, well, you'll probably meet a nice Southern boy. And I was like, what? That was like so much not in my mind at all. And so much not what I was inclined to do. But I'm grateful for the challenge of learning that new culture, which was, again, like, it was a huge shift. And since then, subsequent cultural shifts have been easier because that was such a massive one.
Now, how does this work? Like, I could be wrong, Duke's like kind of, of course, most colleges like really liberal. Isn't Duke like known as like a kind of liberal school? They know as a conservative school, or?
I think there's both. Because it's, the South. It's so, but it's both, and like all universities have an element of that, for sure.
I mean, I'm making this up maybe, but I always feel like a lot of like rich people from New Jersey and New York come down to Duke because they can't get into the pen or something, So, so they go down to Duke. That's always something,
Just still asking. That could be. There were certainly a lot of people from New Jersey,
that too,
and a lot of people from the South. I think, yeah, so there was that element. And I remember it was actually, because I grew up in Alaska where it's sort of purple, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very purple. And we were probably a slightly more conservative family. Mm-hmm. I mean, kind of the libertarian sort of a thing. And it was also a different kind of conservatism than it is today. Yeah. I think that's also really important to pull out. But there was this sense of service that was really strong growing up. And I remember it was challenging because I went in 89, so 89 to 93, right, in the Gulf War starts. And I remember there were all these protests, and I was in ROTC, and, they were like spray painting the vans, like baby killers and stuff like that.
How do you work that, the philosophy of like being RTC versus a college, like that'd be like, something to go through,
Yeah, no, it was interesting. I've never been particularly graceful in managing these things, but I am slightly embarrassed to say this now, but I do think both sides were just so not fully informed, basically, on any campus, really, because it's just people with lots of passion and a little less information sometimes. But there were these big protests that were happening my sophomore year, right outside of my window on the West Campus, which is the main campus at Duke. And I remember I hung out the American flag out my window, and I played Lee Greenwood's "God Bless the USA," which I am now mortified to admit all of that.
So you're trolling back in the day. You're trolling back in the day.
I'm a little mortified to admit all of that, but I think we're all sorting ourselves out. And
oh man, that's a bold move. Like, you don't mess around with me. You're gonna protest from my window. I'm gonna protest back.
It was and I remember I actually had a chance because I was taking like philosophy 10, like intro to philosophy, which was actually an unbelievably challenging course. And because all of this was happening, my professor allowed me to write my paper on the war, and which was a great opportunity. And I think that also showed the willingness to have a dialogue more in that kind of an environment, which I feel like unfortunately we've lost a lot right now, which is really, I think it's a complete travesty, actually, in every element of our society.
Policies have changed so much. Like you talk about being conservative. Like, I don't think people realize this. Ronald Reagan, he's like the corner, like the headstone of conservatism, right? I don't think he would not even make it through the primary now.
No, it was such a different thing.
He would not. They would consider him as like what's it called, a Republican name only or something, right?
Yeah.
He wouldn't make it. Yeah.
Right. And
he's like the founding father of the Republican conservatives now, right? And then now it's like, it's amazing. And they don't see it, right?
No, it worries me actually quite a bit. Our lack of ability to have the dialogue, the polarization of our country right now it's really damaging and really dangerous, I think, too.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer. Somehow we could like get rid of the far left 1%, far right 4%. It could be so much better, right?
I'm with you.
It's like those 2% dominate the media, the news, everything, right?
And it's not most of us fall, right? It's but it's interesting as a veteran too. I don't know if you experience this, but I find both of those two sides, those far 1% on either side, want to use you as a veteran,
without a doubt,
right?
Without a doubt.
And I'm like, no, don't pull me into whatever it is that you're doing, because I'm not with you. I'm probably not with you. I'm right in the middle, actually.
And it kills me, like most of them either side, like, suppose they're negotiating 10 things, right? They get 9.
Yes.
But I can't get the 10th, I'm gonna blow it all up, right?
Yeah.
When you got 9 things. Oh no, this 10th issue is okay, it's very important. I get it, but you got 9 things. Like, take the victory and like fight the next day. But both sides, like, no, either all victory or all loss, right? And it's insane.
It is not a recipe for a healthy society, for sure. So it's too bad. And it's too bad we can't have the conversations, which I hope that we can start to work on, being able to tease out some of the nuances and actually try to look at where it is that we have similar goals and work towards those similar goals, and instead of getting caught in these weeds of contention.
Yeah. So. And as a country, we have to do better than Biden, Trump 2024. Like, I mean,
you would hope, right?
I mean, Trump's gonna be a convicted felon. He's gonna get nomination. I mean, he's like 60 points ahead. Like
there's no excuse for that. I'm sorry, like there just isn't. And I'm not, again, both 1% should be carved off the edges. I totally am with you, but there's no excuse for that. I don't understand how anybody can support that. Truly anybody.
I don't.
But 30% is, right?
Yeah. And you got like, DeSantis and that Indian billionaire, they're trying to out-Trump Trump. You're not gonna out-Trump Trump.
Yeah, it's pretty tough. I mean, there's some pretty brilliant stuff happening with the rhetoric on that side, on that extreme 1%, which is terrifying because it's effective. But it is rhetoric and it is manipulation. And I think, unfortunately, because it's values based, it becomes more difficult for people to tease that out of what it is that they're doing. And again, that happens on both sides. So
And then on the Democrat side, supposedly like there's not even any debates on the Democrat side. It's like, no debates at all. Just there's like President Biden is going to be, dominated. Right. No one can compete against him. Like that doesn't sound right, Yeah.
Well, it's the incumbency, right? I mean, I think it's the.
They used to have some kind of debates, like at least, but then, why let him debate,
Yeah. I remember there was, I think it's Alan Greenspan biography that he says anyone that wants to be president shouldn't be allowed to be president.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like that's where we are in a lot of regards, but. So
I hope we figure it out. But I remember I heard someone say, countries get the leaders they deserve, right? So maybe this is speaking more about us as a country than, the politicians, right?
Interesting thing, right? It is an interesting thing to say is how does this reflect on us? And how can we fix where we are as a country, as a society, so that we do have better options? And I think that's a really helpful question. At the end of the day, a country like ours is reflective of the people that we are. And so that's on us.
And of course, you always say the Democrat and Republican parties have both failed everyone, right? With the way they do business and pick candidates, like, do we need a third party? I don't know. Like, there has to be something out there,
Yeah, I think there's some interesting work being done in a couple of different areas, but there's a lot of reform that needs to happen for sure within the system itself. There's no question. Yeah. All
right. So moving on. So you've done a great job, like you said, putting yourself out there. Like, why don't we talk about how you got to appear on the NBC Today show?
Oh,
that was a bit earlier today.
That was actually.
What is that?
When was that? That was in 2021, I think.
Okay, so not long ago. Yeah.
Is that right? No. It was 2020 because it was, I think, before the book came out.
Okay.
And the book is about to be 3. So The Grit Factor is the book.
So how did that work? Like did that, you have a publicist, a PR team that got you on NBC? I mean,
it was a total fluke. Honestly, it was a fluke. And the reason, it wasn't a fluke. There was an amazing publicist, but the timing wasn't set up with the book because we didn't even have the title. We didn't have the cover. We didn't have any of that yet. But I had contracted with Harvard Business Review Press for The Grit Factor, Courage, Resilience, and Leadership in the Most Male-Dominated Organization in the World, which was a title that we came up with. But their publicist did have a connection with the Today Show. And she called, I remember it was December, and she called, she said, this never happens. And we're not really ready for it, but they want you to come in, I think it was January 1st or January 2nd. They want you to come to New York. Do you want to go? I was like, of course. I mean,
you can't pass that up. I don't care if you're not ready or not.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
I don't care you haven't even written a draft of your book yet.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. I actually remember the Grit Institute, technically, which the Grit Institute is for me, it covers the speaking that I do, and I speak at corporate events, big corporate events across the country and around the world. I do training for big companies, for the Tux School, and actually now for junior high and high school students as well. And then, of course, there's the writing. And I didn't have a website for it. So I remember I was literally on the airplane flying to New York, putting together like just a bare bones website for thegritinstitute.com. And I was like, I got to have this up. I got to have this up. I got to have this up by the time I get there.
So in Army, we had to stay in logistics just in time. So you were you had a website just in time.
I had a website just in time. That's right. Exactly.
So was it intimidating to be on this TV show? You're this is, I'm the best person for this. I'm gonna blow them away with kind of intimidating, something nerves or something like that. Are you just they invited me for a reason?
Well, I didn't think about it because I think you think too much about it and then you get in your head and then you mess it all up. Although I did stutter a little bit. I had to catch myself a couple of times, but you just sort of realize you're going to go on. You're going to have a couple minutes and they're going to say, thanks. And that's it.
And this is live, right?
That's live. Yeah. It's live.
It's only I think the video's 5-6 minutes long. You don't have time to get a brain lock or.
Right. Exactly.
Say, give me a minute to think about that.
No. So you just have to, I think maybe it's probably you get in the helicopter, you stay focused, right? You get on the TV, I'm just having a conversation with you right now. I'm not thinking about your million viewers that are watching.
I wish. I wish. So do they tell you the questions ahead of time?
No,
Okay.
no, not at all.
So just like this.
Just like this.
Okay.
Yeah. Just having a conversation. So, and they're actually, they're professional.
Yeah,
and they're
okay, of
having
course,
conversations. So
Yeah.
as you are. So yeah, it was actually a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And it's over just like that. I mean, you walk on and you walk off. That's kind of it.
And what do you get what happened after this? Like, did you see like an increase in book sales, increase in social media? Like what was the benefit?
Yeah.
Was there a benefit for you out of this?
I mean, I'm sure there was.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'm able to measure it or that I was, and the book wasn't out yet.
Okay.
So, I mean, I had my first book, but we didn't talk about the first book.
How about this, the website that you just put on? Like, could you say, hey, because this talk with NBC today, I had 10,000% increase in website visits or anything like that? Was more just like just basically PR getting
It's additional piece of PR, but it's a helpful piece, right? And I think people love it, and so it's a nice
on your
thing to have
I can't remember where I found it. I think it was on your site, right? Like,
yeah, right.
I mean, how cool is that? Like, you like you can do a speaking gig. Who are you gonna speak? Here's NBC today. We know what more proof you need.
There you go. That's right, exactly. I won't mess it up for you. That's right.
So, any other like big names places you've been at, but besides NBC today?
I not as much on the TV side. I mean, the promotion that we did for the book was really, Financial Times and Business Insider and Newsweek and that kind of thing. So those are the publications, and there's some more academic kind of management type publications and more that are geared towards the leadership and HR world.
Okay.
HR. So those are more in print than they are on film. But otherwise, the speaking that I do is typically for companies that want me to come out and keynote for big events. So,
okay. So I think for the longest time, the speaking about to know, can a woman have it all? Can a woman have a career, be successful, have an amazing family, the right picket fence, cook dinner, on and on, right? Is that even possible? Is this a fantasy, or like like I don't see like how can you like be like president of Amazon, and like do all this different stuff, unless you like hire like nannies and maids and and like do it like that way. But you're doing it by yourself. Yeah. I mean, how can you like cook an excellent home cooked dinner, all this stuff, right? Yeah. Like, is it possible to have it all, or is this a fantasy that we're trying to put on women? I am not a white picket fence person myself. I'm more the wilderness person. So we have found that we live out in North Central Washington State. And I have a husband and two boys who are 10 and 13. Which is just my family situation. I think for people who do their CVPs or their SVPs or their president or CEO of a big company like an Amazon or like anywhere actually, they do have to find ways to help to support what it is that they're doing at home, because at least in the folks that I know will have nannies or they'll have other people that help. But I think you think of it too as like, or we think of it as you make choices to support the lifestyle that you want to live and the way that you want to live with your family. And so my husband and I are both entrepreneurs. I'm an author and a speaker, and that allows me to be more flexible with my work schedule and have more control over it than I would if I was still at Microsoft, at which I had a chance to work, at Microsoft and in a medical device company. And they were both amazing, but you don't have any control of your schedule. So depends, right? I mean, there's financial rewards for being part of a big company that you don't get as easily or in the same way on your own, right? So I think you'll make your choices, and having it all, I think you can have it all at different times, at different points, right? And you have to kind of think of it as like, okay, man, maybe we're really super heads down right now. Maybe we're making soup that we have every day, and then we're making a nice dinner for company in a couple of months after I meet this deadline. And I think that's probably true whether you work for yourself or whether you work for a big company. So yeah, you can have it all, but not all at the same time. That's a great point.
Yeah.
What makes someone a good leader or even a great leader?
I think there are many kinds of great leaders. There are many different types of personalities that can lead really well. I've worked for leaders who are really, really outgoing and leaders that are very much more introverted, and they can both be excellent. I think at the end of the day, the first thing is that they care for their people. They truly care about their people. They love their people and they take care of their people. So that's number one. It's not the only thing, but it's number one. I think number two is they're very good communicators, and they find a way to communicate well, both up the ladder, down the ladder, and sideways. And that's a super important skill. And the third is they have to set a vision, right? And you've got to be able to have a vision and be a little audacious with that vision, be willing to take the risks and be willing to fail and face up to that failure and continue on. So if I had to say what makes a great leader, I think it's, taking care of your people is non-negotiable. Being a good communicator is pretty non-negotiable. And then setting that vision is the leadership piece, right? Is we're going to take this in this direction, and this is how we're going to do something, and we're going to make it work together. So
that was always one of my biggest pet peeves in the Army or like post-Army. Work for people and they have no vision, right? Like, you're the blank, right? You know what? You don't know what you want to do the next 6 months. Are you kidding me, right?
And that's a manager.
Yeah,
that's not a leader.
Yeah,
right?
What are you doing?
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
But it's hard for people because it is taking a risk, and they might fail. And I think that is part of the conversation that we've got to get better at having. Is when you put yourself out there, when you take a big risk, when you're audacious, sometimes you're going to fail, and you're probably going to fail a lot, and that has to be something that you get comfortable with and you're comfortable acknowledging and living into, because then you also give other people the permission to fail and pick themselves up and then get better. And that's how we get better, is by pushing those envelopes and pushing past those failures.
I think another challenge too is like when people communicate, they're like, I'm only going to communicate on the phone or only on the email, only this. Like, you have to communicate the way your people want to communicate.
Yes.
So maybe like, I mean, this is a bad example, but like I have my cousin's son, I talk to him on Snapchat. My aunt is Facebook, right? So each based on age group, it's a different way I communicate with them, right?
Yes.
So I think I have to do the same thing with your people, right? You just can't say text or emails. I mean, of course, you have like a company-wide meeting, same time. Okay, get on Zoom, right? But
yes.
I think you have to. I don't understand when people do that.
No, and I fall victim to this all the time. I fail at this all the time. Which I remember I sent an email recently to, or maybe it was a text to one of my son's friends' mothers about some coordination, and she emailed me back and she said, why don't you just give me a call? And I was like, right, because I'm emailing because I'm in my work mode, but this is another mom. And she's like, just give me a call. It's like, right, I just need to give her a call. And that is something too that I'll actually speak to this, but then I fail in it myself, is you've got to meet your people where they are. And you're right, you need to communicate with them the way that they need to communicate. And that is something that you've got to let other people drive. And that can be hard for some of us who are super execution oriented.
Now on that, I will push back. I hate being on the phone, right?
Yeah.
So I tell people all the time, if I'm calling you, it's like, I could tell you I'm on the $100 million lottery.
Yes.
I'm telling you something's really bad, right? Like,
yes. But you've communicated that. Yeah. And that's an important thing too, is to say, hey, I'm not comfortable on this, or I don't prefer this mode of communication. So how can we make this work together? And that's something that, you work on in a relationship too, is like, hey, I'm most comfortable communicating this way, or this is important to me, and what's important to you, and then we figure it out.
Yeah.
Together.
Or like, I've seen the meme where like on the phone, someone gets a number from like sort of like, I don't even answer numbers. I don't answer calls from numbers I know.
Right.
So what chance do you have?
Yes. Right.
People I know, best friends call me. I don't answer the phone. Right.
Yeah. Right.
So I'm going to answer this random number. Yeah. Get out of here.
Yeah. No, I don't answer it unless there's a name that pops up with it too. So I agree.
So what drew you to aviation? What made you want to be an aviator?
Oh, so I grew up in Alaska, as you mentioned, and there are a huge number of private pilots there. There's a ton of aviation because it's the only way that you can get out to remote areas in Alaska. And so I had seen and had been on a few planes. I'd climbed Denali. We flew into climbed Denali, right? And had been on small airplanes a few other times. And so I always knew that I wanted to fly at some point. When I was in ROTC at Duke, I was part of the simultaneous membership program with the National Guard. So that meant that I had to join a Guard unit as well for my last 2 years of college. And I was part of First of the 130th Aviation in Raleigh, North Carolina. And at the time it was I'm forgetting all the terms now, but it was one of those units where we had all different types of helicopters. So there were Blackhawks, Apaches, 58s, all of those. And later they became more streamlined. Again, I can't remember the initiatives, but it's probably changed again since then. Anyway, it's been a while. And so I loved aviation. I mean, I'd always wanted to fly. And then of course you get to the place where you take your commission, you're going to serve your time in service in uniform. I was like, well, what's the coolest thing I can do? Well, definitely it's flying, right? So I think part of it was just being a young person and being excited, and also just having a general interest from growing up in Alaska.
So you chose to fly Apaches, right? Can you talk about something like I remember the story, like some guy said, you'll never fly.
Yeah.
Or, that kind of mess,
Yeah, that's right. That very first colonel in the National Guard. Yeah, that's right.
So how do you work through, have grit, so to speak, work through being one of the first females, can you talk about that story? How to overcome that stuff? You didn't give up most people, this guy, he's a full colonel, obviously knows what he's talking about. Let me go to be a field person or a field officer or something, right?
Sure.
How do you talk about like the internal, whatever it is you have
The
decided
internal piece.
Say, F you, God, I'm gonna do this.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of it was growing up. I mean, all these different elements that we all have in our lives, right, inform what follows. And so I grew up, I was an athlete growing up. I was, did all the clubs, led all the clubs, did all the things, had been a skydiver. I'd climbed big mountains. By the time I put my uniform on and took the oath of office, I had, climbed an alley. I had jumped out of airplanes 150 times, done all that stuff. And so I think that builds confidence in who it is that you are. And I had more confidence then in who I was. And so having done well, I was also young. So I'd done well for a few years in ROTC. And so then I had this colonel say, you will never fly an attack aircraft. And when he said that, by the way, they weren't open to women to fly. So that was not potentially unusual. It was just a very strange thing to say, given that they weren't open to fly, which meant it wasn't a possibility. And so I think I just had enough confidence from the different experiences that I had had up to that point, and I was young and naive enough to be able to go back to the ROTC detachment and say, hey, I want to go on active duty. I don't want to be in the National Guard where this guy is not going to let me. I think I also had a sense of the Guard at that point that, and no offense, there's a lot of wonderful Guard officers and the Guard people and soldiers, but they don't change over so much, right? So there's
kind of like an old boy network, so to speak.
Old boys network. And like in the active duty, people at least change positions every year or 2 years, and then they get transferred to different bases. In the Guard, they just stay because they're local, right? And so I knew that was a difficult thing that was not going to be surmountable probably on my own. And I didn't want to be somewhere that wasn't wanted either, right? Yeah. Like you don't want to be somewhere where you're not wanted. So that helped to give me that kind of confidence. We also had really great leadership in the ROTC program, and I'm so grateful for that leadership. So I went back to Major Lindemann, I remember his name was, he was an aviator. And I was like, sir, I want to go active duty. And he's like, we're past the deadline, but I'll see what we can do. And so he got me through, which was great. And then right after that is when combat aviation opened to women, when the combat exclusion clause was lifted. And so then Apaches were open to women. Everything was open to women finally.
And so was there some kind of application process to apply to be an Apache pilot? How did that work?
So you go to flight school. Everyone goes to the same flight school. You go to aviation officer.
And that's the one at Fort Rucker, right?
Fort Rucker, right? Which has a different name now that I don't know yet. But anyway, yeah. So went down to Fort Rucker aviation officer basic course, the initial entry rotary wing course. And in that course, they do some assessments and you make requests. And so that doesn't mean that because you ask for the Apache, you'll get the Apache, or because you ask for the Black Hawk, you'll get the Black Hawk, but you put in your preferences. And
this based on like test scores, like simulations, or
that it's based on all kinds of stuff. Okay. We did these funny tests where you have like you have pedals and you have like a joystick, and you have a headphone on where they're saying numbers in one side and letters in the other, and you have to type out like the even numbers.
So you have a lot of information coming in on the screen, outside sources, like
it was
you gotta be able to take it all in and decipher what's really important, right?
Right. And you leave that test thinking you've completely failed, like you're going to be the one that gets kicked out, because I don't know how it's set up, but it's set up to certainly feel pretty impossible. Mm-hmm. But somehow I guess they're assessing this, and there's the psychological evaluation. And so, and I imagine there's also the assessment of like, how many women want to fly Apaches? We just opened this up. We better get one.
Yeah, at least one. At least one. Yeah.
So I imagine all of those factor in. I went back when I was writing the Grit Factor and requested information on how many women were in different roles at the time. And the Army Aviation Center said they didn't have that information, which is shocking to me. But at the time, there were 2% women in aviation, at least as that was the understood kind of number, which sort of made sense. And there was a negligible number in attack aviation. And to be honest, I don't think there's a whole lot more. Like it certainly hasn't come up in any measurable quantity. So there are other women that are flying attack, but not a lot.
So I know like an infantry, if they go to Ranger school, they like 60 days, 2-3 hours of sleep a night. I'm thinking with aviation, there's like sleep deprivation. Is it like
that is not a thing in aviation?
Yeah, you're not flying to RC, right? So to test you, right?
They actually
the sleep, what's called crew rest or sleep rest is a really big thing.
Yes.
Crew rest is a big thing, right?
It's a big thing because they want to make sure that you don't kill yourself or crash the helicopter. I know that becomes a point of contention with the infantry because you guys don't get any sleep, and so. But I will say in the defense of aviators, there's never an aviator that I met, no matter how cocky and self-assured that believed anything other than that we were there to support the infantry. Yeah. Like our mission was to support the infantry. That's it. And, in Fort Bragg, which is now Fort Liberty, right? I need to learn all these new names. But our mission was deep attack. So that was going, deep over enemy lines as a battalion of helicopters and killing enemy tanks. But at the end of the day, we deployed to Bosnia and we did armed aerial reconnaissance in teams of 2. So the reality sometimes doesn't necessarily connect to the mission. But whatever we were doing, we were there to support who's on the ground. And I don't think anyone ever thought anything different. So
when I was enlisted, when I was in the Army, before I came to OCS, I spent 3 years at a 4227 Aviation Battalion, Fort Hood, Texas, right?
Oh, okay. So yeah.
So the brigade, we had like a 1-7 CAF was a division CAF. I was in the Black Hawk unit. And then 127 was aviation was Apache, right?
Yeah.
And I can't remember the name of the brigade commander. He became like assistant division commander. Actually became the division commander for 4th ID in Fort Carson later.
Okay.
I can't, they used to call him Commander something, right? He was like the big superstar aviation brigade commander. Commander Cody.
Oh yeah. He's famous.
Richard
Cody. He's famous. I never had a chance to meet him, but
I remember right before we was OCS, and like he sat me down and I talked for like an hour, like what officers do, what they don't do. Like it was like this so awe-inspiring, right? Like I'm thinking to myself, this dude's about to spend on one phase of time to talk to me about OCS, right? It like blew me away, right?
Oh, that's fantastic.
But he was like so charismatic, like you just knew, like, yeah, he was like he communicated well, all that kind of stuff, right?
Wow.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. No, I never had a chance to meet him, but he certainly is famous in the aviation community.
I'm afraid like how like article Army Times, like we got named commanders from 4th ID, like aviation envy.
Right.
If your officers mad because the aviator becomes division commander, right?
Oh, right. Yeah, there's always that sometimes healthy, sometimes unhealthy competition, but that exists everywhere, doesn't it?
Yeah, but always use an example like a leader who I realized like actually got it right, like all that kind of stuff,
Yeah, which is not always the norm, right? Yeah.
Unfortunately, no, it's not. No, it's not.
Yeah.
So back to aviation. So when did they tell you you're going to be a Apache pilot? And what was your reaction? Were you like happy, surprised? Like,
I was.
Oh, were you like, of course they picked me?
No, I didn't think that. I know I was really excited. So there's a point in flight school where you go into, well, at least again, used to, I'm not sure what it is today, but we used to track into either lift or the scout and attack track. And so they have to tell you before that point. So I tracked into scout and attack. So it was probably 2/3 of the way through, give or take.
And were you the only female that got picked?
Yes, I think that's right. And that may have been because the others didn't want it either too. I'm not sure. But in Scout and Attack, yes, there were not any other women. When I got to the Apache transition course, there was one other woman who had been a Cobra pilot, actually.
I forgot about Cobras.
Yeah, I know. Cobras, right? Yeah, that was a thing.
About Cobras. Still
a thing in the Marines, I think, but yeah. So there were very few women, but the academic environment is not one where there's a lot of, I didn't experience a lot of sexism in the academic environment. You're just all there at school, like you're at college. And it's like when I talk to young women at business schools and they have come from college into consulting firms, into business school, and they're like, well, there's not really what's the difference? I don't know why people worry why there needs to be a women in business club. And I'm just like, I haven't been out there too long. But you realize like they've just been in these kind of semi-academic environments, sometimes going into consulting firms, which at their early entry stages can be more like academic environments, and things get a little bit trickier as you get further along.
Now, I could make this up. I think part of your speech at the Museum Boeing Flight of Boeing, whatever it's called, like you showed a picture of yourself, like the other 10 guys who graduated.
Oh yeah.
And one thing you said, like you purposely wore your skirt to show that I'm a female here and that other females can see what you did.
Purposely wear my skirt. We just always wore skirts then, right? Like that was just the thing. That was, I look back on that, and these old pictures now.
Maybe you said like you personally did your legs a certain way, so you show off your legs.
No.
I'm making that up.
There, I was talking. The picture, somebody's took a picture in the front row of the honor grads. And so I always like to say, well, I made sure that there was a skirt in the front row.
That's what it was.
Yeah. But no, I love that somebody snapped that picture. It's a fun one to have for sure. And that was just our graduation from initial entry rotary wing and the scout and attack tracks. So
you finish the flight school, you go to first unit.
Mm-hmm.
What was your reaction for like a command team? We're like welcome arms, or like, oh shit, we got to have the first female. What is this?
Well, it depended on who it was. I mean, this is the reality of, I think, most experiences, is that there are really amazing people to work for and with, and there are not so amazing, right? It's sort of the bell curve, and the Army is really the bell curve because it draws from everywhere. I had an amazing battalion commander. Then he was then Lieutenant Colonel McDonald. He was later my brigade commander, and I think he retired as a 2-star. And his wife was also a lieutenant colonel, also a battalion commander in Blackhawks, and so he was totally supportive. He was amazing, and I think I'm really grateful that I worked for him as my first battalion commander. I think among the pilots, among other officers, there was mixed reception, but but generally speaking, people were not unfriendly.
Yeah.
It just depended on who it was, and it tended to be more subtle when there were issues. So, yeah.
So you did a lot of amazing things in your military Army career, but you got out of 10. So several questions. The one, like, I would have to think like you've been one of the first female aviators that you would have begun like track to do great things, right? Like first female aviator, put in the career path below zone, make her like lieutenant commanders, like set for success, right? But we decided to get out of 10. Can you talk about that thought process of all that?
Yeah, I think I mean it's a complex it was a complex decision to make, but I think really when I ended up making that decision, and I had decided a year and a half before getting out. So I was in Korea. I tried to extend in Korea because my time would have expired in Korea. And but as soon as they move you, you have another year, right? You incur another year of obligation. And so I tried to extend in Korea. They didn't let me extend in Korea. And I remember the first time that I knew for sure that I wanted to get out. And it was after my 30 days leave in Korea. I had gone down to Australia for a week by myself and learned how to scuba dive. I'd gone to China for 3 weeks and done this kind of adventure travel sort of a trip, and came back and just felt like I saw these rows of Quonset huts, and I just felt like it was deadening. There was no room for creativity. There was no room for like expansiveness. And that was my reaction. That doesn't mean that is the case. I would just want to qualify that. That was my experience of that. But I knew then, I was like, this is not a place that I want to stay. And part of it also was looking at people who were more senior than I was and saying, I don't want that life. I remember the other part, and I had already decided at this point, but deploying to Kuwait just for a month. It was just a month-long exercise when I was stationed at Fort Bliss, Texas. So we deployed to Kuwait, and we're waiting for the manifest. We get, you get manifested multiple times before you finally get your flight out. And I remember I looked over to one side, it's 112 degrees or 115 degrees or something. And on one side of me, there's a private sitting on his duffel bag. I'm sitting on my duffel bag. I'm a captain. Look to my other side, there's a colonel sitting on his duffel bag. And I'm like, it never changes, does it? It's just like this all the time. And I think I think when I look back at that decision, part of it was that I knew that there was a part of me that was not going to be able to give my best in that environment. And that was, again, my experience, how I felt in that at the time, and not true for every human, but for me, that was the case. And I think there was a creative element that I was really missing, and that was not going to be something that I found in the military.
I have to imagine there are people like senior leaders in the military unit, or whatever, were like, hey, Shannon, you're the first female Apache pilot. You can't quit. Like, you can't leave the Army. Like, we invest this money, we've done this, for you, so to speak. No, like, yeah, you have to stay in, right? I have to imagine some people are like putting that pressure on you.
My last unit was a 1-star command, and I remember General Vane said what, and I still feel some shame over this, actually, some guilt. But he said, what would it take to keep you in? And I said, it would take a second command in the CAV at Fort Carson, followed by a foreign area officer assignment. And the thing is, when a general asks you what it is that you want, what I didn't know is that then that happens, right? So then at the same time, like within one day of each other, I got my orders to Fort Carson. He said, your command will be 6 months in, because they were like 200% strength cap, because everyone wants to go to Fort Carson, right? Then I got my acceptance to the Tuck School at Dartmouth MBA program. And I felt incredibly guilty, because I went to General Vane and I said, sir, I don't know I don't know if I said this to him, but like, I don't know if he's going to be there the next time. If it takes a general to get the thing that I'm looking for, then he may not be there the next time. And I've known so many people diverted to like an XO position in Korea because they have to fill it.
For another general to override his decision.
Exactly, right? And then you're just at the whim of the system and that was not how that wasn't the life on purpose that I wanted to lead. Yeah.
Nice. So next, talk about how do you influence other women to tell their story?
You have to start by telling your own, right? And I think that's something that I've recognized has been important, is by telling my own, I empower other people to tell theirs. And that again did not come easily. When I first started writing The Grit Factor, I could not use the word I kept writing we, and I was like, well, wait a minute, I can't speak for anybody else. I can only speak for myself. And we're conditioned in the military to not speak at all, right? To just do our jobs. So that's just sort of not the culture, but also it's, as a woman and as a woman in the military, certainly not. And so it really took a lot to overcome that and kind of own those experiences as my own, which is important because another woman may have a different experience, another man may have a different experience, another leader will have a different experience. And so this is just my experience that I can share. So by telling my own, I hope I empower others to do that. And also by speaking to the idea that by telling our stories, by sharing our stories, by men sharing the stories of women, right? We empower everybody to come to the table with the best that they have to offer. And with all of the issues in the world right now, again, we really need that to be the case. We need not to limit others. We need to make sure everybody has that chance. And so speaking to that, I think helps too with that inspiration, but it does come down to everybody's individual choice.
I know this has been a lot of people say like, what do military veterans need to do? Like transition better? People like resumes this. I'm like, to me, we have to train military veterans to switch, like you say, from we to I, right?
Yes.
Because
yes.
in the civilian world, you say we did this. Like, well, I need to hire your team then. Like, what do you do, right?
Right.
And it's such a hard. And I had a horrible time with it, right?
Yes.
And like, how do we train people to do that, right? It's hard.
It is hard. It is hard, and it is hard. You have to be able to I think there's both a degree of pride that we need to instill in people and confidence that while your experience as a veteran may not directly relate to this other role, you have much more general experiences that will be incredibly impactful and helpful and what companies are looking for. So having the confidence to own that, but also having the humility to say that, hey, you might have been an aviation commander or an infantry, special forces, whatever, right? And that doesn't make you all that. Like you need to still go learn the job in wherever it is that you're starting to work now, and have the humility to understand that you're kind of starting over in some regards, but you have a lot to offer as well. And so it's this balance of both confidence and humility, I think, is really important to instill in veterans. But I think the biggest issue is the confidence that's lacking. And I am just starting to see this more and more in my work with companies and with the veteran ERG groups, and saying, okay, let's see how we can start to address this and start to encourage people to go up for those promotions, to promote themselves as more than the technician. And I hear that a lot from people. It's like, well, I'm just sort of thought of as a technician, but I was like leading these groups in battle. And so you've got to tell those stories so that people understand what it is that you're capable of too.
Yeah, definitely it's a balance. I remember when I was going to transition, when I retired, this sergeant major stood up and said, like, I'm a retired sergeant major.
Yeah.
You know, people do what I tell them to do. We're like, I don't know.
It's not going to work.
I don't know about that, right? So I know what happened to me. In another case, I think a lot of, especially senior leaders, they're like, I'm a major, I'm colonel, I'm whatever.
Yeah.
And they expect to become a VP of something at Microsoft.
Right.
Like, no. I'm like,
no. I
mean, obviously you're not going to become an admin clerk, right?
Sure.
But kind of tailor down a little bit. I think too many people in the military,
yes.
I'm this level, so I should be at this level higher. Like I have 20 years experience. I led 10,000 troops, whatever case be.
Yeah.
Surely I can and it's like, and they get, a rude awakening,
They do. And that is too, I think there's some just kind of comfort that isn't going to come for some time, right? And just sort of trusting that process is really important. So balance the humility with the confidence, trust the process. That's so important. And talk to other vets, read the stories, read the Grit Factor, read those stories and start to understand how it is that you can navigate that new world. It's just like it's not just like, but you could make many, many different parallels. And one of them could be picking up a new sport, right? You might get a coach, you're going to do some training, you're going to read about it, you're going to watch some videos on it. And you've got to do all those same things for what it is that you do as you transition from the military into the civilian world.
Yeah. Another mistake people make, and I made, like, you get to take the first job. I tell people now, like, if you're, economic situation is different, like, if you can do nothing for 6 months, right?
Yes.
Like, do nothing for 6 months, like, do something else, right?
Yes.
But too many people like me, like, start working, we're just on terminal leave or whatever,
Yeah.
And we take a job we probably shouldn't take, and it's horrible job. And then
Right. And then you lose confidence too, right? And that's not good either. Yeah. I think that's a great recommendation. I remember I was actually just re-listening to on my podcast, The Grit Factor, which is now called Facing the Wind. I interviewed this actually amazing civilian woman who was actually her father was in the military and passed away, and she's now the CEO of Workboard. She's fabulous. So Deidre Packnan's episode is amazing. And I said, what would you recommend to veterans? And I thought this was such great advice. She said, try different things, like try 3 different things. Give yourself like 3 months to try a certain kind of job, then do 3 months on something else, even as a volunteer, right? So you're just trying different things out, and don't make yourself make a decision for as long as you can. Like give yourself as long as you can, not as probably more than 6 to 12 months, but don't be afraid to try things out, because you don't know. I mean, cultures are different, requirements are different. It's a different world for sure.
Yeah, I think another mistake a lot of military people make is like, there's this thing that say you're going to get half your pay if you retire, right?
Yeah.
But it's not really true, right? Because the housing is not part of it, right? So only getting like a third of your salary, right?
Sure.
And a lot of people that are like, oh, I'm retiring 3 years. Let me buy a new car, a new house, which probably is not the best time to buy financial stuff. Then you can be stressing you like, I have to get a job.
Exactly.
I have to get a job, right?
Yes. Yeah. No, I think living within your means is a super important thing that all of us need more training on, for sure. My husband's business is Tiller Money, and it's a cloud-based spreadsheet solution that helps you to keep track of all of the spending that way. And I think we all need to do more of that, right? At the end of the day, you live within your means, and then you have more options. If you don't live within your means, you have fewer options.
Yeah,
and that's true at any level of income.
Fewer and worse options.
And fewer and worse options, right? And that's true for people who make exorbitant amounts of money too, right? That buy big houses or fancy cars or big boats. And then all of a sudden, you may not like your job, but you're going to be there for a while.
Because you're making $350,000 a year, but then you're paying like $10,000 a month going out to eat, or $10,000 for this, or $24,000 for this.
Yeah, you got to be careful, right? And they call it the golden handcuffs, I think. So it's. Yeah.
So back at putting like females putting stuff out there, kind of on the subject, not on the subject, right? So talking about like the gender pay gap, right?
Yeah.
So stats show like, suppose me and you get a job. We'll say we're both doing marketing, right?
Right.
And they offer both $70,000 a year. Stats show like 95% time, I'm gonna say, hey guys, that's not enough. I need more.
Yes.
I still have 80,000. Just gotta ask.
Yeah.
Stats show 95% of the time, you're gonna say, oh my goodness, I'm so thankful for this job, and you're 70,000.
Right.
And then a year later, we both get a 10% raise. Obviously, that expounds.
Yes.
And to make it worse, stats show 9% of the time, I've worked for 6 months.
Yeah.
Hey, boss, I come on time every day. I need a raise. Okay, yeah, you do a raise. Stats show you might have done something like bought on a $10 million contract, increase something like that's outstanding. So you ask for a raise. I'm just doing my job. Like, how do you convince females like, no, put yourself there? Of course, some people say, management should not be doing that, but that's a fact of the game, right?
Right.
Like, how do you change that?
Well, part of the challenge is that the statistics also show, the studies also show that when women ask for a raise or when they do negotiate their salary, that's held against them, and that is considered.
I did not know that.
It's interesting. Yeah. Right. I'll send you the study after this. So it's interesting.
That's disappointing.
It is disappointing. And I think part of that is letting people know, making sure that everybody knows this. So number one, if you're a manager or a leader, hold yourself accountable to not doing that for the people that are working for you, right? Make sure you're bringing them in at the same level if they have the same qualifications, or ensuring that you're being equitable in how it is that you're thinking about compensation for raises and bonuses and that sort of thing. But for women especially is letting them know as well and say, listen, here's the stats. There's no reason this should be the case. And so given that, how can you challenge yourself to maybe push yourself a little bit more out of your comfort zone to be able to speak to that? And, on the speaking circuit, I hear this all the time too, is I'll go speak for a conference, and, the speaking business is a funny thing. We get paid a lot of money to show up and do a good job for an hour. But I will have people come up to me and say, so-and-so who's a guy came and spoke to us last year and he wasn't nearly as good and he charges twice as much. And I'm just like, man, so if you're that conference organizer, pay what you pay, right? And I think so all of us can be part of the solution for that. But in terms of encouraging women, I would just make sure that women know that, and then encourage them to say, hey, get out of your comfort zone and ask for what you're worth, because you are worth that.
Yeah, I know. I can't think of his name. There's one tech startup guy. His solution was not to negotiate salary at all, right? So, but I don't know if that's the solution either, right?
Yeah.
I think that's too far the other way.
I don't know. I mean, Saturn was a great car company because you couldn't negotiate. You just went and bought the car, right? So I don't know. I think there's, I think it will probably always depend on the market and what the market will support, right? And so,
and that's a good point too. I had a friend a while ago. She put on LinkedIn, like, she complained, like, I don't know, I'm tired of the gender pay, right? But she was complaining because she learned a friend of hers who worked in Seattle would make more money than her. Right? They're both HR people, right? But I had to break it down like offline. Okay, let's break it down like labor market. This guy works, and they both had like the same experience, same years, right? But like, he worked in Amazon in Seattle, right?
Yeah.
She worked at a nonprofit in like this little town, Arkansas, right?
Well, you can't compare that.
She was comparing it, right?
Right. Yeah, there's no comparison there. I mean, that's cost of living, that's corporate versus nonprofit. I mean, all of those things. I think, there are things that are unfair for sure. And we need to work towards solving those inequities. At the same time, we all make our own decisions, right? And if you and I want to go apply for a job at Microsoft again and work at Microsoft, then great, go do that. And if you don't, then figure it out where you are. And so I think we have to also take responsibility for our own choices. And I'm a big fan of accountability as well as equity.
So next, talk about embracing failure and the importance of embracing failure.
Yeah, it's so hard, right? It's so hard when you push yourself to succeed and you are rewarded for success to embrace. Embracing is hard. Maybe it's acknowledging and owning it that's important. And then saying, what do I do with this failure? How can I use this failure to grow and to be better next time? And I when people ask me about how do you create a culture of grit and resilience, a culture that is willing to take risks. I actually had a company that asked me this. This is now a number of years ago, and I was doing a keynote for them. It was a virtual keynote, and we had probably 8 rehearsals, which is, I've never heard of anything like that, because they wanted everything to be perfect. And I was like, wow, there is no tolerance for failure in this company. And that's kind of like good for the space shuttle, but not so good for like the rest of operations, right? And so I think when we think about it for ourselves or for our organizations, we've got to be willing to allow for pushing ourselves out of where it is that we're comfortable, falling down and saying, okay, what can we do better next time? How can we make that adjustment? It's a hard thing to do. But again, when we acknowledge that and okay, this is hard to do, but you will grow from failure. So let yourself fail. It's okay. It's a great opportunity. So part of it is the awareness, and then you're able to work from that. Some of it you just have to push through, right? Because you fail and you're like, I tell this story about being in Bosnia, and I had grown up in the Army under this 1st Battalion commander who I have a ton of respect for, and who was then again Colonel McDonald. And he had said, when he pinned on my 1st lieutenant bars, he said, the only good use of any increased power you will ever have is the increased responsibility to take care of your people. And I had internalized that. I believed that. I worked to live that. And I remember in Bosnia with a platoon that I had taken in another battalion, one of my pilots was sick. We were just getting ready to deploy to Glomok, which was a deployment within a deployment, to go do a gunnery. Kind of fun, something different. And I remember I heard from somebody else said, hey, Chuck's not feeling too good. And I went to Chuck. He was my instructor pilot. This guy from Texas. He spoke about half of the speed that I speak, but super, super smart, super great guy. I said, Chuck, I hear you're not feeling that great. You don't have to deploy. You don't have to come with us to Glomok. You can come out in another cockpit. Another flight when the next company comes out. And he said, no, LT, I think I'm doing okay. And can't do Texas, sorry. And we flew out to Glomok, we shut down, and then went to the Tactical Operations Center. And I remember the company IP came up and talked to me, and he said, hey, LT, we need to get a medevac for George, for Chuck. He's bleeding out of both ends. And we called a medevac. They took him back to Tuzla, got his bags, took him to a hospital in Germany. And it turns out he had Crohn's disease. And when that medevac took off, George came up and talked to me. George was our company IP. And he said, LT, you've got to take care of your people. And I kind of bristled, I was like, I know that. Like I've been working on that. I've been living that. And I said, George, I asked him how he was doing, and he said he was okay to go. And he said, LT, sometimes you've got to take care of your people when your people can't take care of themselves. And that was a lesson for me in that I had failed.
Yeah, I bet that hit you pretty hard.
Yeah, it did. And, it did. I had totally failed in like my primary mission. And And yet we had to go out and fire a gunnery, and we had to go out and I had to go out and be the platoon leader. And so there was no time to like wallow in that or to feel ashamed and like shut down or like curl up on my cot, right? It was, you got to get out there and do your thing. And so I think it was a helpful lesson looking back on that and saying, yeah, I had failed. Like I screwed it up and I didn't take care of somebody that needed me to kind of step in where he wasn't willing to. And then you got to get up and you got to keep going, and you've got to tell yourself how you're not going to do that the next time. So you've got to get better at it for the next time. And that's what all of us have the opportunity and the responsibility to do.
So next, talk about this. I think a lot of people like me have problems with this, and that's embracing success.
Embracing success. Yeah. Yes.
Yes. Like I don't deserve success. I put in all the hard work. I've done this, but yeah, I don't know. I'm ready to take the accolades or whatever. I'm not ready for these rewards. Even though I know I deserve it, it's like, I think a lot of people are afraid of success.
That is a very thoughtful question, because I think that many of us are more afraid of that than we are afraid of failure. And I feel like it's something that we don't always even recognize in ourselves. I think I have some of that also, where you realize like, wow, I may be holding back here because I don't think maybe I deserve that, or I'm not the right person for that, or it's doubting yourself, right? I just watched a short section of an interview with Steven Spielberg, and he was asked, like, do you ever doubt yourself? Like Steven Spielberg, right? And I said, every single time I make a movie, I doubt myself. Every single time I start a movie, I think I am never going to be able to get that where it needs to be. Every time. And every day he walks out there thinking he's probably not going to be able to make it work. And so I think all of us that push ourselves and push our comfort zones, doubt ourselves. And it's really important to, again, it's this awareness of that, be aware of that. And so you can push through that as best you can, because that can be as damaging or more damaging than the fear of failure.
Can you talk about your own podcast real fast? Like how it got started, who you talked to, and all those kind of things?
Yeah. So I have 2 seasons out right now it was initially The Grit Factor, and now it's called Facing the Wind. And I talked to leaders, again, in the vanguards of their field. So they're not all military. So in the Grit Factor, I'm using all examples of military leaders, right? That happen to be women. They've all faced this double crucible of an incredibly challenging job on top of not necessarily being supported in their work. In the podcast, I expand that. And so there are a couple of people that are part of the Grit Factor book that are on the podcast as well. But there are also some others, because you just the world starts to open up when you start to do this work and you meet all these other incredible human beings. And also had the chance to interview, like a technology CEO. This is Deidre Packnad, who's just amazing, I'm bringing her up twice because I literally just listened to our episode again. But Mandy Hickson, who is actually a pilot in the Royal Air Force, is another one of the interviewees. And Sandra Stoltz, who's an admiral in the Coast Guard, the first woman to run one of the academies. And so all of these incredible leaders. The next season, I'm just starting to plan out right now, but it will be both men and women. I'll always have 50% women, always. I think that's the goal. And always, of course, speak to the military and the veteran experience as well.
So how do you promote men to come on?
It's a great question.
Do you have to something in their social media, like shows they support women doing something, or like based on a field? Like how do you do that?
What I am hoping to be able to evolve into next is to be able to say, how do I look at people who are speaking to this particular topic in a meaningful way? And how do I bring in diverse voices who are speaking to this specific topic in this particular way? And by doing that, by bringing in voices that are both men and women to this area of focus, which will be a slightly new area of focus in the next season, on this facing the wind, on courage, on this willingness to be able to step outside of where we're comfortable to make these contributions, and looking at those sources of discomfort and how we push through those. Again, those I will be looking for people who have really addressed that thoughtfully, and again, trying to look for a diverse group of voices that bring different perspectives to bear on that same idea.
So I'm sure this person never agreed to this or like that, but I think it'd be interesting in if you brought on the guy that told you females never fly.
Yeah. You know what? I've actually thought about that. I don't know if it would be the same podcast or a different podcast.
Or maybe not him, but maybe somebody like will say, like, I won't say like they're anti-women or anti-females.
Different perspective.
Because no one's going to say that out loud, right?
Sure.
But
yeah.
maybe like you just, like I think that'd be a good conversation to have,
I agree with you. I remember when I was in college, I attended a Triangle Cities, so like Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, right? It's the Research Triangle Park. And there was a Triangle Securities Conference. And there were several generals there. Rhonda Cornum was there, who was the flight surgeon who was shot down and was a POW in the first Iraq War. And she was there with her, I think now ex-husband, but in her flight suit. And the discussion, there was Max Thurman, General Thurman was there. And his argument was that women should not fly in combat. This was before combat exclusion was lifted because they were more valuable than men because they had the capacity to bear children.
I remember the argument.
You remember the argument? Yes. And I remember Rhonda Cornum, who had a 15-year-old daughter, I think maybe even at the time her daughter was 15, standing up and making the argument, said, you know what, we should have the choice to decide what risk we take on, to decide whether or not we put ourselves in danger. That's our choice to make. And it's a legitimate conversation, right? It's a very interesting conversation. And I actually, to the point that when we first started this conversation today about bringing diverse voices together that disagree, we need to do more of that. And I would love, I actually think that could be another really interesting podcast, and to just talk about, hey, here's somebody who thinks that we should keep certain books out of school libraries. Here's somebody who thinks that they're all fair game. Why? What's our commonality? And there are points of common interest, right? I think we're making things too polarized, too black and white, too binary.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And it's not a binary conversation. None of these are.
I remember was, have females not going to camera was like, what kind of country are we going to be if we become desensitized with females dying? Like, what kind of, do we want to be a country where we just like, 25 females died in combat yesterday and like don't care about it? Like, I remember that was being an argument too.
Yeah. Well, I think, and for that one, I would love for, again, this should be a great conversation, right? To say, well, let's look at the maternal mortality rate in the US. So if you want to talk about women dying, we can talk about where we're desensitized. Sorry to bring that up. But really,
that's
these are
point. Yeah.
But they're bigger conversations, right? So are we okay with women dying in childbirth? Because right now we rank terribly among very wealthy countries that way. But we don't want them to die in combat. I mean, that's a little silly.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. It's death's a death. And frankly, yeah. Well, I mean, the more conservative argument might want to support women in their more maternal roles, but we're not, right? So whatever that is, liberal, conservative, doesn't matter. But just coming to the table to say, we value life, right? We value a woman's life. We value a man's life. So then where does that take us? And I'm going to take a little tangent for you really quickly, because one of the interesting conversations right now around AI is this AI going to take over the world and, kill all the humans, whatever. But one of the interesting arguments I just read recently was, what if in designing AI, because AI is designed, right? It's designed by humans what if we are looking at this design to say, well, hey, we have all these biases, but we know they're wrong. And so can we design AI so that it doesn't have those biases, so that it's kinder, so that it's more compassionate? It's an interesting alternative idea. I don't know if that's realistic or not, but I love the idea that says, could you be designing AI into making us better than we are today, like more compassionate, more thoughtful, because we're more thoughtful in the design than we are in our actual actions in the world? This is an interesting idea. So,
and like everybody talk about AI, right? It's bad. My thing is like, how do you make sure the people designing AI are good people, right? That's what I'm scared of. Like, are we gonna get some psychopath designer, who?
There's plenty of those.
Yeah, and there is, or like, how do we stop that, right?
Yeah.
To me, it's not the design. It's like how do we make sure the people designing it are like good people, so to speak, right? And of course, good means different things, different things.
And that's the challenge. Yes.
And it's like I'm gonna design this AI to make sure people who have stutter have a better ability, right?
Right.
Or something else, right? It's just.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a rapidly changing and evolving world. And I know that causes some anxiety for people, but for all of us, really, I think of it. And at the end of the day, there's nothing you can do to change, to stop the progress or to stop the movement. And so then how can you participate in making things better? I think that's
I kind of joke around, like, if Skynet does come, we all know to blame Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI. If Skynet comes, you go get put Sam Altman in,
Yeah.
he's the one responsible. He let it all loose.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And when we talk about going back a little bit to the grit factor, and I'm going to bring this right back to AI, don't worry, and then the anxiety around it. But the grit factor, as I started to interview these leaders in the vanguards of their fields, which really was the development of the grit factor, and then the courses at the Grit Institute that we deploy at companies, we deploy them at schools, right? Is there are 3 parts of the grit triad, and we look at commit, learn, and launch. And commit is this owning your past, like owning your story, connecting to your core purpose. That's all internal work. And that is internal work that you can do without any external influences. And so to the degree that there are external influences that you can't control, you come back to what you can control. And that is that commit phase of the grit factor. The learn and the launch are 2 other phases of deep engagement in the present. And there's building your team and active listening, and there's mindset. And then this launch phase is grounded in the past, deeply engaged in the present, looking towards the future with that audacity, the willingness to take risks, authenticity, and adaptability. So the adaptability is the crux, right? We have to be able to be adaptable because the world is changing so quickly. But when we have anxiety around that change, we come back to that commit phase. It's chapter 1 and chapter 2 of the Grit Factor. There's a whole course on paths to purpose because that phase is so important. And the studies are really clear that people who are individually connected to their purpose, their own individual purpose, have greater longevity in a job, and they do better, their performance is better, and their engagement is higher. And that's pretty spectacular.
Is The Grit Factor the only book you've written?
No. So North of Hope is my first book, and it's a much more personal book. It's a memoir of a trip in Arctic Alaska, which we can speak more to if you like. It certainly has grit as a large component of it. And then I have a book of essays as well called Where the Wild Gets Inside.
So do you consider yourself a professional writer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And like, how's it? Are you a professional writer because you say you are, or is like certification you have to get, or like, do you have to sell a certain number of books, or just like, I'm a personal writer?
I think you have to decide that you're a writer because you write, and I'm lucky that I've traditionally published 2 books, and I think there are many, many, many more to come. And it's what I've always wanted to do. That is my story. When I go back to the commit phase of the grit factor, right? And of that grit triad, the commit phase is, what is my story? Well, my story is, I always wanted to be a writer. That's what I've wanted to do since I was 12 years old.
Can you explain your book writing process? How does it work? Like, do you spend an hour a day writing or doing drafts, or like, how's that come all together, and then and then how you like present it to a publisher, or the whole process?
So I have a video recommending first steps for people who want to write on my YouTube channel at the Grit Institute, not under Shannon Polson, but under the Grit Institute, because I get asked this question a lot. And writing is a question of sitting your tail down in a seat and doing the work. And doing it every day. And then just again, like whether you're a veteran transitioning from the military, or whether you're somebody who's picking up pickleball, right? Like, what are the ways that you get better at something? Well, you look for external ways to learn. You model yourself after people who do a really good job. So you read a lot all the time, and you read really good books. You don't read the trash. I will not, like, if something's not written well, I'm like allergic to it because I'm terrified I'm going to like pick it up. And so you read good books, you analyze those books, you take classes, you join writing groups, and then you sit your tail down every single day and you write. And the writing might be, thinking, it might be editing, it might be organizing, it might be actually doing the writing itself. But you take it as it comes, and you sit down every single day and you do that work when and where you can. Ideally, of course, if you don't have children and you can sit down at the same time in the same place every day, that's great. Whenever I hear that advice, I'm like, those people do not have children, because this is not possible in my life right now, but maybe after college it will be.
And you also do poetry too, right?
Yes, I do write poetry.
Your poetry writing, like, is that just part of the creative process you do for fun, or
Yeah.
You have a book of poems out there?
I don't have a book of poetry yet. I aspire to. I write it because I love it. And I usually write it when I have been reading more poetry and been more inspired that way. I think poetry, more than any other form of writing for me, requires me to really slow down, like completely stop and block out what's external. And that's the beauty of writing well, is that you do stop and block things out and really focus in on what's important right now.
What's your next book that you're going to write?
So I right now have a proposal that will hopefully start to pitch this fall. And that is the part of getting a publisher, right? And, I do want to say that for anyone who wants to write, there's many ways to write. There's many ways to publish. The way that I am choosing to publish is the traditional form. There are many people who would say that form is dead and you should just self-publish, and that's fine. I still find value in the traditional publishing process. And this next book is looking at facing the wind. It's looking at courage. It's looking at how it is that we can get stuff done against all of the forces that tell us that we can't. And there are always more of those, and there are those that support you. So
this next question might get blasted by some people, but it's my opinion. I think too many people leave the military who are not good leaders and become leadership coaches. Like, a lot of these people get out of the military and they
there's
can't.
Leadership coaches right now, right?
Like, I swear I get at least 2 or 3 emails or LinkedIn message a day from people like random places.
Yes.
Hey, I'm a military veteran too. Can I be a coach? I mean, of course, it's more detailed than that, like, I don't know you. What makes you like,
right?
It doesn't pay people like, of course, there's like people like, there's a guy named, I think his name, Thomas Smith. He does like, there's a thing called something Traverse where he takes like CEOs and takes them to Montana.
Okay. Yes. There's a couple of wonderful programs like that, actually.
But I just too many people like, oh, I'm retired, whatever, I know about leadership.
Yes.
And then they're like, I'm gonna charge come like $25,000 a day, right? Something insane, right? Like,
right.
Of course, you can't say, maybe passionate about it, you can't tell them not to do, but man, it's like, it has to be something like, do we really need another military veteran leadership coach? I don't know.
I don't know either. I had somebody ask me in another realm of life recently about somebody that they were evaluating for a position who presented themselves with great confidence. And I said, look at the track record. Do they have a track record of success? If they have a track record of success doing the thing that you want them to do, if they do, great. I mean, in this case, they did not, right? They presented themselves like, hey, I'm applying for this position and to do this thing that's this pretty significant role. And they had no track record of success. And that is something, as I think about encouraging companies to hire veterans, for example, and encouraging veterans to promote themselves and have the confidence to be able to present their experiences in a way that are attractive to companies. You don't have to have the specific skills, right? I just ran a LinkedIn poll on this. I'm like, do you hire for the skills or the mindset, right?
Oh, yeah.
So most people hire for the mindset. I would say you don't have to have the specific skills, but you do need a track record of success. And the places that I have made mistakes, and this is whether it's the corporate world or seen mistakes made, or the nonprofit world, when we worked recently on a library that we built out in our community, which was an incredible opportunity. But and it's hard, but there are people that are confident in themselves that may have no idea what they're talking about. And so you've got to look for people to be part of a team who have a track record of success, full stop. And in something, right? And in something. And then you can teach them the job. If they have a great mindset, they're great learners, they've shown how they can overcome obstacles and learn new things, and they have accomplished things, actually finish them on their own, then they could be a great candidate, even if they have no skills for the job that you're hiring for. But that track record of success is important. And I would say the same for any potential leadership coach. Like, what is their actual track record of success? And I don't know how many of them, what they would answer, but there's some that could have great answers and there's some that won't.
Yeah, for me, it's like I get emails all the time from leadership coaches, financial advisors, and lead generation.
Right. Yes. Yep.
Like, stop the madness, please.
Stop the madness. Exactly. That's right. Yeah. Financial advisors, I always think like, if I don't know you, I'm not likely to hire you.
Especially like in some random place like North Dakota or Montana or Chicago, right? Like,
right.
At least be in Seattle or or no.
If I have no personal reference, we're not probably going to hire you, right? Like, I think people need to be a little smarter about their LinkedIn reach outs too. I think, to be honest, I think there's just been this massive surge of reach outs that are cold, and sometimes they're relevant, but they're usually not. And like, well, are you just sending this to everybody that you're connected to? And that doesn't make any sense. And that makes me not want to work with you because you haven't been thoughtful about that,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So talking about LinkedIn posts, you did a post a while ago where you highlighted one of your crew chiefs.
Yes. Mike Cameron. Mike Cameron is awesome. He's actually lives in Washington. I haven't met up with him yet, but I think he's still a ranger in the Olympic National Park. Mike was the crew chief for my first Apache that I flew, at tail number 248, because you never forget your first Apache, right? And what I talk about Mike all the time, because Mike was an E4. And, we talk about leadership as officers or non-commissioned officers, right? But he was the E4. So he didn't have anybody reporting to him. His whole job was to just do the 10-hour inspections on tail number 248 and launch us. That's what an E4 does. And so
basically the crew chief, for they're responsible for the airframe, right?
Yes.
They're responsible for everything involved in the airframe. The maintenance, the fuel, that's his job. You depend on him
Yes.
You know, you're not dependent on the full colonel or lieutenant commander for your flight.
No.
Or the one officer or the IP. It's this E4.
Exactly. The soldier.
Yeah.
Who can never fly in the Apache, by the way. Like the crew chiefs for a Black Hawk or a Chinook get to fly all the time. Ours never get to fly because there's 2 seats in the Apache, right? They're tandem seated like a fighter jet, and there's no room for a crew chief. So they never get to fly, but he's responsible for the aircraft, or she.
I think that doesn't make it harder, right? Because if you're a crew chief from Black Hawk, you're on the Black Hawk, oh shit, that doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
Or this doesn't do right. Let me fix it right now. Where you're a crew chief for Apache, like it takes off. Unless you come back and say, hey, crew chief, this didn't feel right, you know.
Right.
Big difference.
He's not on it, right? Or she's not on it. And my other best crew chief, by the way, was a female, Sue Harris, in another battalion. But Mike Cameron took such pride in his work and had such a sense of responsibility in what he did. And the example that I give, and it seems like a small thing, but when you've worked around soldiers and you've worked around these things long enough, you know, this is not a small thing. But I remember one time going out to the aircraft to launch, and it was our job. I think it's different in other services, but in the Army, we needed to untie the aircraft and do the pre-flight check. And then we get in and we take off. And there's a crew chief out there just with the, you know, there's a fire extinguisher. They've got their eye protection on and their hearing protection on, and they make sure you get off. And so we walked out to the aircraft. Mike had already untied it, unchained it, basically got it all ready for us. We did our pre-flight. And then we start the run-up procedure. And as we turn on the APU, get the rotor blades are starting to turn, and he comes back up to the aircraft, pops open the door to the engine, and is just looking at the transmission. And he's looking at the transmission deck to see if there's any kind of a leak on it. He wipes it down, just watches for leaks. I mean, it was a kind of attention to detail that he was not expected to have. Like, he was too junior to be expected for that. But he didn't limit himself by the lack of other people's expectations, if that makes sense. And I think that's a really important thing for all of us. Don't let yourself be limited by somebody else's lack of imagination. He held himself to the highest possible standard. And in doing that, he set the example for all of us. And that was not just me as his platoon leader, but it was the whole company. Ultimately, he was known throughout the regiment because he had such attention to detail and such pride in his work. And that is where, when I talk about leading from any seat, right? You can lead from any seat you sit in. You might be the janitor, you might be the admin. You can have a significant impact on a culture, on a company, because of your commitment to excellence.
I remember many times when I was an officer, like, you know, I would like purposely go this way, like a certain E4. Like I know the E4, he was like the de facto leader of everyone, right?
Yeah.
Like you know, so a lot of times you need the input and feedback from the E4 versus like someone above you, right?
Yeah.
Because if I get feedback, if I get buy from the E4, you're gonna convince all his friends to follow me, right?
Yes.
And a lot of people don't get that wrong, right? Even especially in civilian award, they think, oh, I don't need an impact from the HR clerk or this admin person or the lowly marketing person, right?
Right.
And
yeah.
opportunity, right? Because they're the de facto leaders a lot of times.
Oh, for sure. No, there's no question. And I will, just because I don't give him enough credit, and he gets all the credit. My first platoon sergeant when I was a platoon leader was Andy Couturier, and he was the best NCO that you could possibly hope for. And, you know, he would push me hard on things if I would say, hey, we need to do this. And he might push back really hard, but it was always in private. Mm-hmm. And if we stuck with the original course of action, he would march down the stairs and pretend like it was his idea, and they would follow him anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. The soldiers would. So that was the relationship that was so important. And I learned so much from Andy. I called him Sergeant C, yeah. But he was the best platoon sergeant you could hope for. And as a young lieutenant, if you work for a great battalion commander and you have a great platoon sergeant, you are so incredibly lucky. Oh, yeah. I mean, I was just so many blessed.
That people have horrible battalion commanders, four-star major, horrible platoon sergeants, and like, set up for failure. You're
set up for failure, right? No, I was incredibly blessed with the people that I will say my second platoon sergeant suffered as a result because he was not very good. Mm-hmm. And I had seen what excellent was. Yeah. And so I was like, look, this isn't gonna cut it. Yeah. And that was tough. So there's, you know, you've got to.
Can you talk about this? Can you talk about the connection you make in the Army? Because like, you know, you have the great connection to E4 chief. I think a lot of people in this world don't get that. They use like you're like a VP or something, you're not going to have a relationship with some like random officer worker, right?
Right.
Can you talk about how something like I think the Army actually does good? You know, like I have a lot of friends post-military, like work with, you know, different ranks, things.
Yeah.
Can you just talk about the whole process, how that works in the military.
Yeah, I think there's the opportunity to have these bonds that are significant because you're working towards a common mission that is bigger than yourself, right? And one of the things that I think is so compelling, and it's why I designed an entire course on, it's chapter 2 of the Grit Factor, but it's blown out. It's much bigger on purpose because, you know, in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs that everybody likes to quote, and there's this pyramid, right? And there's like food and shelter at the bottom. And first of all, it's not his hierarchy. Like it's not his pyramid. He didn't actually design that. It was designed by a consultant. So it's usually misattributed. But the other thing that is not usually commented on is that at the top of that pyramid, when Maslow late in his life said that self-transcendence was the height. It wasn't just getting to the peak of your expression. It was self-transcendence, getting beyond the self. And that is what we have, or we have the opportunity to have in a place like the military, is that we're working for something bigger than ourselves. And when you're working together for something bigger than yourself, there's a particular bond. That means you're working harder, you stay later. You know, I remember, and I don't want to speak badly about anybody, but I remember, or groups of people, because there are wonderful people committed in many ways, and there's reasons for different organizations. But I remember I have been a professional or semi-professional choral singer for a lot of my adult life. And I was singing with the Seattle Symphony Chorale. We were singing, I think it was the Mozart Requiem. And the chorale, you know, the orchestra is unionized. The chorale is not. We're just volunteer singers, right? And pretty good ones, but, you know, still volunteers. But because the orchestra is unionized, like when it gets to 9 o'clock and the rehearsal is scheduled from 7 to 9, they are packing their cases at 9 o'clock. The chorus doesn't do that. The chorus stays until you get it right. You know, and I kind of feel like that's what we were in the military. We like stayed till we got it right. And that meant we stayed late, and that meant we worked weekends. And I have a hard time when I come up against that. And again, I don't want to use that specific example farther than it should go, because there's reasons for unions and there's reasons for people being treated well and being paid enough. So please let that just stand as a partial comment. But in general, when I have worked on projects and people are like, well, I don't do that. Like, that's too much for me to do. And I'm like, we're not on the right team. Like this is not going to work, because if I'm going to be on a team with somebody, we're going to get stuff done. And we're going to do whatever needs to happen to get stuff done. And where I have made mistakes in the past is when I have been on teams where that is not a shared mission. And I think that's a special thing in the military. In many cases, not in all cases, the military is a huge place, right? But when it's good, we're on the same team and we're here to get stuff done. And that means we're going to do what it takes, and we're going to support each other to do that.
I think it's a challenge now, like it's very important in the military too, maybe. Like, this is my experience, right? Army, post-army, every organization I've been at, there's like 80% of the people are like, you know, you only pay me $30 an hour.
Yeah.
All you can do this, you know, and that's it, right? The other 20%, like, you pay me $30 an hour. Oh my God, I got to do what I do to make sure I'm valuable to you. Right?
Yes. Yes.
And then the 80% get mad and wonder why the 20% are getting promoted, getting raises and stuff. You know, it's just a mentality. Now, of course, you know, you got to get paid with your awards, you know,
of course,
and
all
stuff.
those
But like,
things. Yes.
there's too many people like, you know, oh, I'm only getting this. I'm only doing this. I'm only, you know, and like,
I've got no patience for that. I remember, so my family comes from the Midwest originally. So we're very, although I grew up in Alaska, my family's from the Midwest and from Kansas, actually. And I remember my grandfather, my dad's dad, said that if you get paid 25 cents an hour to scrub toilets, you better earn every single one of those 25 cents. Like, you better do your best job. And you want to know what? If you do that, you're going to be noticed, and you're going to be promoted, and you're going to do better. If you're the one that sits back and is like, well, I did my 25 cents worth, I'm done for now. I'm like, you're going nowhere. Yeah. You're going nowhere fast. And you're just going to be a cog. You're just going to be a cog.
And it's frustrating that people don't see that, right?
Right. I mean, you hold yourself to excellence. Like Mike Cameron, right? He's an E4. He wasn't getting paid anything, obviously, as an E4, right? And he held himself to a standard of excellence where that guy's going to do, he could do anything. I would hire him over almost anyone else I've ever worked with.
He was easily doing the work of E6, easily.
Oh, yeah, at least. Yeah, no, he was absolutely incredible. So yeah, you hold yourself to a higher standard, and you'll also be more proud of yourself, right? Like, have pride in your work, for goodness sakes. And if you don't, I mean, I don't know what I don't have a lot to say. I don't have a lot of ideas. Take pride in your work and then demand what you're worth. But you do have to earn it first. And I do hear from employers sometimes like, hey, we get these young people in and they think they're going to be CEO tomorrow. And it's like, no, it's both kind of paying your dues. You've got to get experience. You've got to show that you can have a track record of success, that you can contribute meaningfully, and that you can learn as you go. And once you've done that, then start having those conversations. But if you don't do that, I don't have a lot of time for that.
Yeah, I'm with you. So next, talk about how you determine your speaking fees and what kind of speaking engagements you look to have. Like, how do you say yes to potentially speaking engagement or say no?
So right now, and as I'm building up the Grit Institute, I hope that this will change. But at the moment, speaking is my primary revenue source. And so when I started to speak, you speak for free initially. And I also have a video on my YouTube channel at the Grit Institute where I talk about this, by the way, for people who are aspiring speakers. But you speak for free and you have to build up your tape, your videotape that kind of shows you doing your thing so that people can see what they're hiring. And then you start asking around and you start saying, okay, I've been doing this for 3 years now. Here's somebody else doing it for 3 years. Try to get a sense. It's hard to kind of know sometimes what people charge, but you can kind of look around. And then I worked for an agency exclusively for a while, and they were able to increase my fees pretty significantly. And then you keep kind of doing comparables, you know, like you do with other things. I'll look around, I'll say, okay, this person I know what my abilities are. I know how I deliver, and this is where I should be pricing myself. I probably price myself on the low end of the bracket right now, but I'm happy with it. And I also am not willing to do a lot below that because I now know I've been doing this for 10 years. I'm really good at what I do. I've spoken around the world to companies of all sizes, from 60 to 6,000 people in an audience. And so I also, that means don't take a lot of pro bono. I may take a little, 1 or 2 things a year for pro bono, but then there's an opportunity cost, right? So if I book to do something pro bono for a cause that I care about, it's got to be a cause that I care about, that I'm connected to, then I can't book something else, right? And it's time away from my family. And so I've started to get pretty careful on what I accept and what I don't accept, because I'm not willing to be away from my family more than 2 engagements a month or 3 engagements a month will allow me to do. Virtual engagements let me do a lot more because I can do more online. But it's a nuanced thing. You kind of figure it out as you go.
Of course, you see the memes on LinkedIn, like your company makes $1 billion in profit, but you want me to speak for free.
I find it offensive when people ask me to speak for free. I am now like officially offended. And if there's a place that wants you, like, hey, it would be so helpful to have you do this because these people would benefit so much, I'm like, great, go get a sponsor, because sponsors will help pay for the fee. Yeah. I mean, so if you're willing to do the work, then I can do the work, right? And I think that's true for speakers. And at the end of the day, what we're offering is both experience in the art and the craft of it, but also the experience that we have that we can bring to the table. And so I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to do that for companies. I'm really grateful that I'm usually found by people. I don't have to go out and look for the business anymore too much. And it's an incredible opportunity. I love speaking to companies. I love the chance to get up there and share this really transformational information and the stories that lead into those transformational ideas. And then ideally bring them into the courses at the Grit Institute as well, because that's where the real transformation can come, is the book, the keynote, and then the courses. And that's where the magic happens.
What's an example of a cause you would consider speaking for free for?
Oh, come on, Jason. Yeah, well, not one when somebody
that you consider, not that you're doing, you consider.
I just had a military women's group, I won't say which one, reach out and say, look, our budget is probably not what your speaking fee is. Would you consider speaking on this date for this event? I said, let me know what your budget is and let me see if I can make it work. It's a military women's group. It's going to be several hundred people. They'll likely buy books for everybody in the audience. And so then that's something that I try to work with, because that's something that's clearly like part of my mission is, among other things, is working with women in leadership and working with veterans transitioning. And so that meets both of those sweet spots. But I also work with sales groups, and I also work with C-suite groups, and I work with anybody who's like trying to get over a hurdle, whether it's growing so quickly that it's really hard to keep a company culture together, or whether it's that they're really running into a lot of tough spots. So it's all of those things, but if it hits one of those sweet spots, then that may be something that I'll consider.
And of course, that's going to be probably depends, but on average, how many speaking gigs do you do per month?
Yeah, I won't travel more than twice a month.
Okay.
So, but I will do more if they're virtual. So yeah, so I average about probably 20 to 22 a year. And I purposely keep that low. So because which is also why I'm not going to take something for less than what I speak for, because I can command that. And I'm not willing to be away from my family for less than that. It's not worth it.
Do you have like a bucket list speaking engagement, like you want to do, like, speak the Madison Square Garden in front of IBM executives, or like,
I want to do a TED Talk. Okay. I want to do a TED Talk. So that's something, right?
I probably haven't done one.
I know. I don't know actually why I haven't done one, but I'm going to try. I will prioritize that in the next year or so as to get on the TED stage. Yeah, I don't know if there's
maybe
anything.
speaking from the, U.S. military aviation industry, something like that, or I don't know.
I haven't really thought about it that way, to be honest. That's a really interesting question. Yeah, so I don't think I have an answer for that. I really enjoy the opportunity to speak to literally like every industry that you can think about. So like from managers at In-N-Out Burger to, the chemical industry, to finance, to the meat industry, to produce. I mean, like literally anything that you can name, the packaging industry, right? I mean, these principles of grit and resilience and looking at it in a holistic way that we do in the grit triad, this commit, learn, and launch, it applies frankly to everybody. And of course, the way that I address each different group is different depending on the levels of the people that are attending and what they want to get out of the conference.
So is the preparation different based on the groups and,
for sure.
and size
Yeah,
of people you're talking to?
Absolutely. Yes. And I end up going over it, oh my gosh, so many times. And I look at the industry trends and I look at their company trends, and we have conferences before or calls before the conference so that I understand, hey, what do you want your people to come away with? I ask them, are there keywords that you want me to use? Are there things that you want to celebrate? Are there things that you don't want me to mention? And so once I have that, I can craft it specifically for them. I always think of every single keynote as being specifically for that customer and that client. And that's really important to me. I've heard from others that that's not always the case with keynote speakers, and I'm grateful that I can connect to clients in that way. But I love business and I love business challenges and problems. So when I can make this grit triad apply, it's magic.
So when you do your keynote, obviously you rehearse, but you have to find out somewhere like you do rehearsal, like you want to hit your points. You give the actual speech, you're like, you say the same thing, but not in the same way, if that makes any sense.
Exactly. Right? Yes. Yeah, exactly. Because it's going to be different depending on the client, depending on the circumstance, depending on the day, depending on how the audience reacts to you, and whether they think something is funny or not, or whether they get into one story and they're really engaged, they're not. And so, yeah, they're different every single time. And that's part of the fun of it.
So what do you do for fun?
What do I do for fun? Oh gosh, I read a lot. I like to paint. I like to play piano. My family and I backpack quite a bit and hike quite a bit, mountain bike, road bike. Is that pretty much it? I run after my two boys all the time. I mean, my gosh, they keep us very busy. And I think my work is fun, honestly. Like I just listened to an interview with Seth Godin. He's like, it's not work-life balance. It's like life. It's life. And I think that's about right. I think that's about right. We also just got back from a year in France. We lived overseas for the past year, and travel is very much something that I love. And so now I'm working on my French as well. And so I think that's fun too.
Do you still skydive?
I don't still skydive. No, I still have my parachute, but I'm quite sure no one would want to jump it since it's not been jumped in 20 years.
So it's been like that long since you skydive?
It's been that long. Yeah. I did it in college and in the military. I jumped, let's see, where did I jump? I jumped in Scotland and North Carolina. Didn't I jump somewhere else? Anyway, I loved skydiving. It was a ton of fun. And I would do it again. I'd go up and skydive. When my kids are ready to go jump out of an airplane, I'll go do another tandem with them and it'll be fun.
Then how about scuba diving?
Yeah.
Still doing that?
No, but again, when my kids are old enough, I think it'll be a ton of fun to do again. Yeah. We've snorkeled with them, but they're 10 and 13. So they're still just shy of kind of, well, I guess you could probably scuba dive at this point. Pretty soon they'll be ready. Yeah.
So talk about things called paths to purpose.
Yeah. Paths to purpose. I designed paths to purpose when in the midst of the pandemic, and I was working with clients, we kind of had this huge shock around the world. And then we sort of didn't do anything for a while. And then we went virtual. And as I was talking to clients, I was hearing again and again the need for this, there was this lack of connection to purpose. There was a need to connect to purpose. And then the McKinsey studies came out as well that supported the same thing. So the McKinsey studies came out and they said, when individuals are connected to their own sense of purpose, not the company's purpose, right? Not what the military does really well, but their own internal sense of purpose, they stay at a job longer, directly relevant to the Great Resignation, right? And all of the exodus from jobs. They stay at a job longer. They have much higher engagement. And right now we have at least 65% of people unengaged from work, right? Completely disengaged or not engaged. And they have better performance, which of course makes sense. They also show higher scores in meaning for both work and life, which is relevant to their physical health and their mental and emotional health. And so I was like, there is this thing around purpose. And I feel connected to this idea of purpose because that's what I sort of started to lose at some point in the military and lost in the corporate world. And so how do you help people get to this place? And I talk in my keynotes about the 5 whys, and I walk people through that. And that is part of the paths to purpose as well. It's like drilling down to something that is agnostic of the organization and agnostic of the job specifically, to say, hey, this is my purpose. And I give the example of myself in the military and how I could connect to service. The idea of serving something bigger than myself, right? And serving people in a different way, a meaningful way. But then I realized, like, well, why did that not work for me then to stay in the military? Like, if I was connected to that, I still left. So then I started to explore the idea of purpose. And I looked at the ways that people do it in different cultures and at different points in different cultures around the world. And so I developed a training that is called Paths to Purpose. There's probably a book that'll come from this too, I imagine. And we look really at going deeper into owning your own story, because that's really the opportunity and the responsibility every one of us have, is to take this raw material of our life that we're given, whether we ask for it or not, and shape it in the direction that we want to go. We all have that opportunity. We don't all take that opportunity. But then it's connecting to purpose, both in this discrete and specific way, but also looking at broader and more nuanced ways. And so Paths to Purpose takes you through owning your story, and then 4 different ways to connect to your own purpose, both specific and more general. And then at the very end of trainings at the Grit Institute, we have an activate and integrate stage, which is to say, now you've done this work, you've done all this work in this last, 5 weeks. How can you take this into your daily or weekly goal setting and assessment, and take this to your manager or your mentor or your teacher or your coach and say, this is what I'm working on. Will you help me work on that as well? Because the adult learning model shows that we learn 10% of what we do formally, 20% through our manager and our mentor, and 70% is through what we do in our own life and work. And so I wanted to be able to take that activate and integrate stage to say, here's all this work that we've done on purpose. How do you now bring this into your life in a practical way that lets you really go deep into it? So I'm super excited about it. I've run it at the Tuck School at Dartmouth, at Intuit. We ran it through at the legal department at Verizon, and it's a super, super powerful program. It's been amazing to see transformation from it.
How do you get people like, I don't need a purpose, this is malarkey? How do you influence them to convince them, no, this is actually good for you?
Well, part of it is just looking at the evidence, right? And looking at the studies. And at the end of the day, you can't convince anybody anything, right? They have to decide it for themselves. And there was one lady in a company once who's like, well, do I need a higher purpose? Like, I just really want to make a lot of money so I can buy a big boat. And I was like, cool. That's your purpose right now. Most people usually find by the end of their lives that that's not adequate as a purpose. But if that works for you now, that's great. And then keep asking yourselves these questions, because all of the data and all of the anecdotal evidence as well is pretty strong on the idea that we all need to connect to a larger reality, to a bigger sense of purpose. And I would also caveat that, because there are people who use that argument to do bad things, that you should also make sure that whatever purpose you connect yourself to meets the criteria of first do no harm, right? So if you have people telling you to, I'm going to get political really quickly, say storm the Capitol, that's a bad idea. That's not the right purpose, right? So find another way to live your purpose, and first do no harm and connect to something bigger than yourself.
So talk about your role. I think you just took on as the at the Tech School of Business at Dartmouth.
Yes. Yeah.
What's that all about?
So I attended the Tech School after I left the military, and I'm incredibly grateful for those 2 years, because again, not always being graceful in my transitions.
So this is not ignorant. Where is Dartmouth at?
Yeah. It's in New Hampshire.
New Hampshire.
Yeah. So it's 2 hours north of Boston in New Hampshire. Dartmouth College is an undergraduate school, but there's also many graduate programs as well. So the Tech School has been around for a really long time. Business management and leadership program, kind of general management. It's known for its very strong cohort and connection among its students, which I certainly experienced myself. I met my husband there, have some best friends from there. So, and it's a mix of case study and hands-on, very kind of tactical learning. So the case study appealed to me, which is here's a business problem. Let's solve this, via discussion, conversation, using these principles and tools that we know, but you also still learn capital markets and accounting and all that kind of thing. So I now teach at the Tuck School's executive education program for leadership and strategic impact. And that is every spring and every fall, there's a cohort that comes through for a week, and they have a number of different courses. And I'm really grateful that I've just started actually working with them this last spring, but it's a fabulous group and always super motivated people. They're usually senior at a company, kind of preparing for the C-suite, that level where they've been around for a while, they've done a lot, and now they're going back to really solidify ideas, but also connect to their own personal leadership and develop that leadership so they're ready for the next step.
And this is virtual, in person?
No, it's in person. Yeah. So I get to go back to Hanover twice a year, which is awesome.
Wow, nice.
And spring and fall is like the perfect time. So
nice.
Yeah.
So you met your husband at Dartmouth?
I did.
So
yes.
do you have any military background or?
No.
So how did that work? How did that work? Like, no, a lot of military people, they married military people.
Yeah.
Same culture. How that works? So like, military culture, all you think you had to go through and like,
yeah.
him being like,
he's an amazing guy.
Yeah.
I would just say that, right? I remember my backseater, Matt, who I flew with in Bosnia, and he's like, LT, you're just going to be so out of luck because there is no guy that's going to want to date some girl that's done cooler stuff than he's done. He used other words than that, but yeah, so yeah. Anyway, my husband's awesome. He's amazing. We're great partners in this whole like marriage and life business, and that's a big deal. He has always supported my doing whatever it is that I want to do. So that's a really big thing. His dad was military. So his dad,
some kind of knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah. His dad was a Marine. I say was because he's passed away now 2 years ago, but his dad is a Marine at end of World War II and Korea actually. And so really had a strong identity with the Marines. And so so
has there been a time like at the dinner table, like your dad, like your husband was telling the kids, I did this really cool thing. You're like, yeah, I don't know about that. This guy is way cooler. Son, this guy is way cooler. Your dad talking about.
Well, it's a pretty cool stuff. We both, fortunately, we both married late. So we married when we were 35 and later than most people. Neither one of us had been married before and had kids, obviously, later than that, or maybe not obviously, but later than that. And both of us had traveled all over the world. He'd traveled in, Nepal and South America, and he did a semester overseas in Africa. And like he's done his stuff, and I don't think I would be interested in somebody who hadn't at least gotten outside the state once or twice. Yeah. So no, he's had a fascinating life, and we are, I think, of the same mind of wanting to build that same kind of life of adventure for ourselves and for our children. And that was part of the impetus for going to France for the last year.
So here's a question for you.
Yeah.
Like, obviously you and your husband want to be great parents, right? But you've done great things. Your husband done great things. Does that put too much pressure on your kids, like meet that same level of excellence? Like, how does that work?
Our kids just think we're, schmucky parents. We're not interesting to them at all. Yeah. But I don't know. I have high standards for our children, I think, and my husband Peter does too. But I think that's just who we are. And whether that puts too much pressure, I don't know. Our first kid just wants to start a business. He wants to he raised $10,000 for World Central Kitchen for Ukraine last year on his own. He's just he's on fire. And the other one doesn't want us to tell him anything. So I don't know. We have high standards, but I think that means that we love them. And that's how I grew up. And I think we're of the similar mind that's going to set them up for success in their lives.
Your challenge for your kid might be in the future, like they're doing something right. And somebody may say, isn't your mother the first Apache pilot? Like, what are you doing right? Like, you're not meeting your parents' standards, like do better,
Yeah, I feel like in general, society puts too little pressure on kids right now.
Think so? Okay.
I think that's going to be probably a highly controversial statement, but I think it depends on which sector you're in. It actually totally depends. We live out in the boonies, there's one school anywhere around. But people are like, oh, don't be too tough on them. I'm like, really? Kids are tough and kids are resilient, and they actually, frankly, need a little grit and resilience, right? And so, we took them to France last year. They went into a public school in France. They did not speak French. It was hard, and it was really hard. And the French teachers aren't known for being very gentle. In fact, they're sort of the opposite. Our youngest kid had a really tough time, and you know what? They're tougher for it. I don't think it wasn't abusive. It was hard. It was hard, right? And at the same time, they had Ukrainian classmates who had fathers or brothers fighting in Ukraine and were both taking school in French, but also going home and doing Ukrainian school while their father's fighting in Ukraine. Yeah. And I was like, you want to know who's got it tough? Yeah. That kid's got it tough. Yeah. And I think it was a helpful perspective for them and for all of us. So I think obviously we have to take care of our children. Obviously there's a mental health crisis right now across our country, and adults and children. All of those are real, and we have to take care of that. And at the same time, taking care of that doesn't mean not having standards. Yeah. So there's a balance, and there's a balance.
So I'm guessing if one of your kids brought home a participation trophy, you probably throw it away in the trash.
I wouldn't throw it away. I'd just say, great, how are you going to get better? Like, but we're pretty strict. I mean, we have 2 boys. We don't do video games in our house. There are no phones. I mean, they're 13 and 10. We said we'll talk about it when they're 16, and we're not going to change that. I mean, that is what it is. And, there's all these parents that'll say, oh, we have to do it because all their friends have it. I'm like, really? I mean, you're the parent.
Yeah.
So no, you don't have to do it. And I hear absolutely no data to support making another decision. And so I think that is being strong enough in your own convictions that, hey, we're going to be parents in the way that we want to be parents, and we're going to do things the way we want to do, and we're going to have high standards. And that's just how it is. They will not always live up to them, but we don't always live up to ours either. And so that is that honest, kind of vulnerable conversation that we didn't do so well. When I was growing up, my parents never admitted anything.
Yeah.
So we try to do that better. And I'm sure I fail every day as a parent.
Yeah. Like, so growing up with our parents' generation, like, you had video proof.
Yes.
That's not me.
Yeah.
I say that.
Yeah.
I have it on video.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Exactly.
I don't know the other form. I never said that. I never did that.
Exactly.
Like,
that's
your
right.
memories way different what our memories are growing up, like.
Yes. It's true. It's very true. I will say, in terms of humility, that I have never had anything humble me so much as parenting every day. So
I found this on your LinkedIn. Hopefully I told this down right. So the quote it's not your quote. I think it says God, and actually I don't know who it is from, but standing still is moving forward into discomfort, into what is not expected, into what is not perhaps accepted, is where growth happens.
Yes, I that is not Seth Godin. It's he probably says the same thing. I think we all say that if we think about it hard enough. But yes, I think you have to keep moving forward. You have to keep pushing yourself, and you have to keep learning. And it's that continual learning, continuous improvement that is I think both going to be a hallmark of success for going forward, because the world is changing so quickly. You must be continually learning, but it's also got to be fun, right? I think it's what life's about, is keep learning, keep improving, keep getting better, and keep doing better, right? Keep contributing more. And that's the opportunity, is what we contribute, what we give back.
Do you see yourself ever retiring?
No. I mean, yes and no. I will probably do different things at different times. I will always write, and probably always speak as a result. I think, no, not really.
Okay.
And maybe also because I work for myself, and my husband has said too, he's like, I'm never going to retire. And it's like, should we have talked about this before we got married? Because I sort of plan to travel a bit more, but we can work from wherever in the world. But I love engaging my brain. And I think that's, important to me to be able to do. And so I cannot ever imagine not doing that. Yeah.
So you did an article on Substack, and I think it's called Psychic Requirements of Change.
Oh yeah. The psychic requirement of change. Yeah. That was, so 2 newsletters ago. So my newsletter is called Facing the Wind. It's on Substack. So you can find it on Substack, or you can go through my website and I'll connect you into it. But, the psychic requirements of change, we're looking at coming back from France, and we had this year away. Some people will say, oh, that sounds idyllic. I'm like, well, it was really hard. Actually, it was very challenging, and it was really incredible. I mean, and it's been my dream. It's all of those things, right? It was always my dream to live overseas. Hopefully we'll do it again. But coming back, people would ask like, oh, isn't it great to be home? And isn't it great to be back in your house? I'm like, yeah. That's all true. But I was exhausted when I came home, and I was like going to bed at 7 or 7:30 and sleeping for like 12 hours. And I was glad that I blocked off a week to kind of settle back in, although there was no settling in. It was really just like recovering, and realizing that when there are major changes, and there have been in our world over the last 3 years, and people feel tired and burned out, is like, there is a psychic cost to change. It's also a constant, right? But there is a psychic cost to that. And so how do you work within that environment successfully with that psychic cost, and still be successful? And I think part of that is acknowledging that we need to build rest into our schedules. And that's something I wish I'd added into the grit factor, because I always say, like, grit is critical. It's very nuanced. It's very complicated. It's critical, but it's not a sustainable operating mode. So you have to build rest into your schedule. And that's your daily schedule, your weekly schedule, your annual schedule. And then it's also about relationship. And that, there's so many great studies out right now that really emphasize this importance. The Harvard Grant study is one. There was Bill Gates just had one of his first podcasts on his new podcast was talking about the importance of relationship. But those places that go back to this commit phase, again, of the grit triad, these first few chapters of the grit factor, that's where we find our strength, and that's where we find our courage. And knowing that change is going to be exhausting at times, means that we've got to make allowances for that. And that was really the idea behind that post.
So while in France, what was going on with your house here in Washington? Like, did you rent it out to someone, Airbnb, or you guys want to come check on once in a while? Or
we know our neighbors really well. I mean, we live in a small community where people kind of look after each other. My brother came out and stayed there a few times. He lives in Oregon, and we rented out. We have a little guest apartment that we rented out for several months over the course of the winter. So there was always somebody checking on it and checking in. And my husband is also in technology. He works in fintech, and so he has everything digitalized. So we know if there's a water leak or there's something else. And so he could let the neighbor know, hey, we have an indicator that we have a water leak. Could you go check on that? And the neighbor would check on it. And
So why France? Why choose France to live for you versus, Italy, Germany? So many great places you could have went to. Why France?
Yeah. And I'd love to too. We wanted to go to Europe. And we wanted to go somewhere that we could ski for the season because we're skiers and our kids are competitive Nordic
And when you
skiers.
say France, you weren't in Paris. You're like one of those.
No. We're in a little village in the southeast. Okay. Yeah. So we were outside of Grenoble in a place called the Vercors. It's a high mountain plateau. It has about 5 villages on that high mountain plateau. And the way that we picked it, honestly, was knowing we wanted to go to Europe, knowing that we wanted to go somewhere we could ski. And then my husband went in to get the kids' ski gear from our local mountain shop. And the owners of that local mountain shop are an American Olympic skier named Eric Bjornsson and his wife, who is a French national biathlete named Marine Doucet. And she said, well, why don't you go to my town? And my parents are here next week and you can meet them. And honestly, it was perfect.
So everything lined up, so to speak.
It lined up. It didn't make it easy, but it made it easier, certainly, to get settled. And it was just a beautiful community. We lived right across from the elementary school. Our other son, just had to walk a mile.
And how many people live in this town?
About 5,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you got there, was reaction like, who are these random Americans coming to take over a French town? Like, how dare they come here?
No, I mean, the French are delightful. Everyone but my 10-year-old's teacher was delightful and incredibly generous. We did not speak French. We worked on it really hard while we were there. My 10-year-old now speaks pretty fluently. The 13-year-old's decent, and my husband and I are okay. Actually, we're not really okay. We're pretty bad, but we can communicate badly. And people were so incredibly generous and so helpful. And I ended up with there was a women's coffee group that met and spoke in French. There was a women's wine group that met and spoke in English. There was a little choir that sang, and I have, been singing most of my life. So I sang in a little choir, and just a lovely, lovely group of people. Really wonderful. Again, small village, right? Small village in the Southeastern Alps where the tourists are usually French. So it wasn't like Chamonix. It's like everyone speaks English, right? Yeah. And Courchevel, everyone speaks English and Russian. And this little village is just French. And that made us learn it. It made us connect into the culture in a more meaningful way.
And you'll plan on doing this again in the future, like
I would
another
love
place?
To. Well, or that place. I mean, I don't know. We're going to go back every year, I hope, to that same village, and then also continue to explore France. We also, while we were there, we traveled to Italy and Switzerland and Turkey and Greece and Morocco. So we got out as well. And of course, went to Paris, went to the UK and that.
But people don't realize how easy it is to travel across Europe. Like, you can drive anywhere. You can take trains everywhere.
It's amazing.
They have like Ryanair's, like cheap flights.
Ryanair is unbelievable. Yeah, exactly. Right. That's how we got to Denmark, actually, and went to the Lego house for our kids. Yeah, it's really easy.
So how do you encourage, or even you want to encourage, like your kids to keep in touch with the friends they made in this French village?
Yeah, that's actually a great question because we don't do phones, right? And actually those kids didn't have phones either, which was a really nice thing. I'm really big on waiting on digital for kids. I think it's really important. So we are writing postcards. So I'm like, hey, why don't you guys sit down and write a postcard? You're going to have to do it in French. You're going to have to take French anyway, so you may as well write it in French. And then we'll go back and visit as well. But that will definitely be something that we work on, keeping in touch with people and also encouraging them to as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what advice you have for anyone who's the only blank in the room, only female, only Black person, only whatever, you're the only one in the room, what advice you have to them?
That is a great question. I think it's really important to find your people, and those people may or may not be in the room, but there will be some of them in the room that are your people, but also to build your team. This is chapter 3 of the Grit Factor, by the way. So when you pick it up, you can read about it because we talk about the different types of relationships that you want to make sure that you form. You'll look for a manager or mentor. You'll look certainly for mentorship, but there's always an intimate, right? That might be a spouse or a partner, but it might also be a very close friend. There might be a colleague. So you have your team that you can always rely on to talk through challenges, whether they're tactical or strategic. And that's really, really important. So if you're going into something where you're the minority, I think that's an important first step. And then the second thing is remember to connect to your purpose when things are feeling tough. So why am I here? My gosh, like people are acting this way or really are really difficult. Why am I here? Well, I'm here because I'm here to serve, or I'm here to, do X or Y. The other thing is to be willing to be honest with yourself. Like, is there something that I'm doing to make a challenging situation more challenging? Is there something that I could do better? Or not. And then lastly, I would say is to communicate. If there is a real challenge, if you're one of the first and there's a real challenge with a colleague or with your boss, is sit down and have an honest conversation and say, I don't feel like this is going as well as I'd like it to be going. How can we do better? Just be very upfront with it. And you kind of have to feel out each situation. Every situation is different. Every person is different. Every relationship is different. But really work to figure out kind of where it is that, you can find those points of commonality, but more than anything, start with your team. So
how do you take care of yourself, like both mentally and physically?
Yeah. I don't always do a great job of that. I think moms are notorious for not doing very well at that. I am starting to need to do better because my knees are bothering me and my shoulders bothering me. So I was like, I need to start saying I'm going to block off time for yoga, which was never a thing that I did because it wasn't hardcore, right? And it turns out like once you're over 50, you better start doing yoga.
After 50, everything's hardcore.
After 50, everything is hard. Thank you for that. Yes, everything's hardcore. So that is my goal, is to start to block off time to do yoga, because, women and men, but especially women, I love lifting weights actually. So I need to start to add that back into the schedule. Adding the active time in and then the quiet time in is my goal to do better at, which I don't do very well. And then for me, whether it's meditation or prayer, I think it's really important. Prayer is really important to me. So finding that quiet time to be and to sit and to be in a different space is also really important. So all of those things I will tell you I need to do, and none of them I do consistently well right now. So
one thing, like of course, the younger generation gets a lot of like flack, whatever. One thing they did well is like the mental health, right? Like me growing up,
yeah.
If I said, hey, so do you need to do this? And like, I have to take a mental health day. I'll lose my fucking mind, right? Like, are you kidding me right now? But it's actually a good thing, right? Of course, I think you can't do it all the time, right?
Right.
Everyone needs to reset. I think that's one thing this generation does good. Like they're like, hey, hold that, this is too much stress on me, Then again, on the side, stress is good for you too, right? Have to be some kind of balance, right? I think
it's always a balance. There's always that tension, right? And that is the thing. But we didn't do enough of that.
Oh, no.
And maybe there's too much of it happening, and we need to find the way to meet in the middle. But certainly that is too where that honest communication comes up. Where if you're a manager of somebody and they need a mental health day, hopefully you're connected with them, so it's not that surprising. You might even suggest it. Say, hey, why don't you take off? Take off next week. Like, we don't need you in here next week. Go chill, go fishing, go read, go whatever. And know that you can, again, like help to anticipate their needs even before they do. But yeah, there is a balance to be found as well.
Of course, the pushback would be like, like you suppose, I'm just making this up, you get redeployed, we'll say to Iraq or Afghanistan.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And like, you're like the leader, right? You're the commander or sergeant major or whatever. Like, man, I'm really feeling down or the best. I need to tap out, right? You can't do that because
you can't do that.
You can't do it.
Not when you're the leader.
If you're tapped out, your career's over with, right?
Right. There are some, I think that's too, we're learning. That's why grit and resilience still matters, right? And when people say, oh my God, grit, like, do I just have to suck it up? I'm like, sometimes you do. But really grit is a much more holistic understanding. That is, it's not the sustainable operating mode. You give yourself the rest when you need it so that you can go hard, right? So you can train hard, then you rest. Like anyone knows lifting weights, right? I like the analogy, and is you don't lift chest every single day because you've got to recover, right? You've got to recover and let your muscles rebuild. Or you don't lift back every day. You lift it, every other day or every third day because you've got to let those muscles recover. And the same is true for us. But you do want to push yourself harder and harder so that you get stronger and stronger, whether it's weightlifting, whether it's leadership, whether it's just pushing through. And there are times when you've got to have built that up where you're going to go all out longer than you think you can. And then you're going to get stronger for it if you let yourself recover. So it is that balance of active action and recovery and action and recovery.
Even deployed, you can't work 20 hours a day, 365 days a week.
No.
In my unit, every time we deployed, 2 times deployed to Afghanistan, each unit, like, you had to take a day off, right?
Yeah, right.
It's like,
right.
and in like one group, like the great command, like you walked in, like, what are you doing here?
Right, exactly. I remember there were a few field grade officers when I was a younger officer that we would watch, and they would not sleep, right? Because they weren't flying missions. So they would, and they thought they were tough because at the time, I'm sure they're smarter now, but at the time they thought that if they just didn't sleep for like the entire 4-day FTX, they were cool, or they were tough, or they were whatever. And complete morons after like 20 hours. And everybody was like, yeah. And I remember the regimental commander coming down once and commanding the field grade officers at the battalion level to go to bed. And I'm like, this is absurd. Like, this is just stupidity. And it wasn't even war. Like if it was war, it would be one thing, right? But it wasn't. It was an FTX. And so field training exercise for your civilian listeners. So going out in the field. So no, I think you have to be smart enough yourself, and then also to make sure your people that are really pushing themselves hard also are taking, and you educate them on that too, right? Help them understand you've got to take that rest so that you can go harder next time, right?
Yeah, and sometimes you have to second, like my second appointment, something like really bad happened the first day we got there. So 5 days, none of us sleep, right? It was like something really bad, right? So it's 5 days. Like we could attack Max and stuff, like we knew we couldn't sleep, right? Because it's like really some bad stuff, right? But then it was over, and like we slept like 2 straight days, right?
Yeah. Right, exactly. And then you probably needed really another 2 weeks to kind of recover, right? So making sure leaders are educated on that, they can make sure that their people are taken care of and they can take care of themselves so that they can continue to lead. That's really important. So
your company, it's the grit factor. Is that like the coaching thing, the speaking thing, the books, or is it all combined? The Grit Institute is everything. Exactly. Yeah. And in an ideal world, an ideal engagement with a customer or a client might be, hey, I'll give the keynote to your, 500 or 1,000 people or 100. So that's like a lead funnel, so to speak, or lead magnet, so to speak. I mean, I guess I don't know that it's a magnet because it's a paid service, but it is the initial engagement is oftentimes a keynote along with the book purchase, which makes it a better event for them because then there's a takeaway and there's a way to go deeper. And then ideally we then move into training that says, okay, let's take this training now, either going for grit or paths to purpose into your company for the next 6 weeks. And that's really where you transform culture, is when you really make that commitment, you align some of the language that you use, you align, I mean, in a longer term engagement, you could align other elements of culture as well. But the keynote and the book are kind of still primary for me. And then the training as well is something that we're really building into, because that's where the transformation happens. So do you ever say, if I want to hire me as a speaker, you have to do the training, or do you say, hey, my speaking fee is X amount, but I'll lower it to this amount if you sign up for the coaching? We haven't come up with that, but that is something that could happen, is more of a bundle, sort of an offer sometimes. Yeah, it just depends. And that's up to a negotiation with every client and where they are and what their needs are. So from your point of view, who's your perfect customer? My perfect customer. Gosh, I feel like all my customers are great customers. Great clients. They're people that are dedicated to transforming culture. They're dedicated to making a change and being successful, and understanding that grit and resilience is part of that journey for them, that purpose is part of that journey for both them as leaders as well as for their people. And they're willing to make an investment in their people. That's the key, is a client willing to invest in their people, which is what they do when they bring me into keynote, which is what they do when they offer the books out, which is what they do when they offer the training to their people. That's investing in your people for the long run. And it's, the statistics on this because you're in HR, but the statistics are pretty clear that the younger generation expects employers to invest in them. And so this is an opportunity to really take the best of leadership and management and grit and resilience and mindset and purpose and story, and say, we're going to offer this to our people in a way that really shows that we're investing in them, and in a way that can transform our culture for the better in the long run. So that's the ideal client, is someone willing to invest in their people. So how do you solve this? Because of course, this generation, I want to be like trained by the company, right? Yes. I think a lot of companies have the mindset, if I hire you, you need to be able to work with day one, right? Interesting. So I think there's a conflict there, right? How do you fix that, or is that possible? I think in this case, again, it's a balance, right? It's a balance. But I think the client, or the company, has to understand that they must train people. They must invest in their people for them to do good work. And so I would push back on a company that thinks they need to just start off
running at day one. Nobody starts off running at day one. I mean, that's why you have the book, The First 90 Days, right? As a leader, it takes you, 90 to 120 to 180 days to kind of understand what the heck is going on. And you've got to invest in your people and train them well in order for them to be connected in with the company mission and the company purpose, and to be engaged as an engaged employee, and to be sure that they know how to perform and how to contribute in their best possible selves. And that's the only way that it works for both people. So
I remember this saying, of course, probably LinkedIn, I probably get this wrong, but somebody said, the CFO told the CEO, hey, Jason's going to leave us to give him a raise. No, was, Jay, we need to invest money in Jason for training, right? And the guy was like, well, what if you invest money in Jason and he leaves for someone else? And the CFO was like, what if we don't, he stays?
Yes, exactly. No, that is great. The other part of that is, well, if he leaves right away after you've trained him, maybe you should know enough about Jason and what he wants and how he wants to contribute to be able to connect him to that purpose. The other interesting stats are people don't stay longer because they're paid more and have bigger bonuses, right? There's really interesting stats on that. They stay longer and they perform better when they're connected to purpose. Yeah. And so if you are doing your work to connect with your people and care for your people and develop them because you actually care for them, they're going to stick around. I mean, maybe once in a while they don't, but that's the other part of it, is that's a leadership failure, right? If your people are leaving constantly, that's a leadership failure. That's on you. So you've got to know who it is that you're hiring, make sure your hiring process is tight, but also make sure that you are investing in your people and connecting with them regularly enough that they know that they're being invested in, that they know that you care for them. And if you do that work, I mean, that's what it's about.
What makes you say no to a potential client?
I haven't said no to it, unless somebody asked me to speak for free. But this is such a great cause. You should just come down here. I was like, time away from my family. You can't tell me that that's worth time away from my family. We give back significantly in our community and financially and with our time. So that is something that we do, but we make those choices ourselves. We don't wait for that to approach us. So I will also explain that we have our own philanthropic priorities. But otherwise, I have a fee, and I'm happy to speak to anybody that is willing to invest in their people. And I do think of that as not, do I necessarily have a strong personal cohesion with their particular company's mission necessarily, but if they're investing in their people, I care about people and people's connection to purpose, because I believe that makes us all better people, and that makes us show up better and do better things in the world. And if I can be part of that, that's awesome.
How about this company's values don't match yours? Like, suppose they're like, of course, a bad example, suppose they're like, we don't believe females should be flying Apaches, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sure I've spoken to many people who believe that. Yeah. I don't mind. I mean, I think by getting out there, putting yourself out and sharing the story, sharing the lessons learned, I think number one, some people have come around probably as a result of that. And number two, there's a chance to impact people positively. And if I have that opportunity, that's fantastic. And again, I think we also do need to be out there in the world with people we don't agree with as well. And so I don't care if I agree or not, as long as we agree that you want to invest in your people and I want to help you with your investment in your people. That's awesome. I think that's great. Yeah.
So back to your villas in France, how did you and your family contribute to that society in France? Like, what did y'all do for those people, so to speak?
Thank you for asking that, because the reality is that we felt uncomfortable that we did not contribute much in that way, right? We were just there, right? I mean, we contributed because we were part of the economy, and we certainly went out to eat and we bought things in the economy. But it was hard to know how we could do anything there and for us, that was a point of humility, and humility, I think, is the right way to describe it. It wasn't shame, because I wasn't for lack of being aware or trying, but it was just a humility that there wasn't much we could do there. Like in our community here, we are very, very, very involved. And over there, we were kind of reliant on the generosity of others. And that was hard and an important lesson in kind of vulnerability, and I think in humility for all of us.
While in France, did you ever come back to the States to visit, or you were there for the whole year?
We were there for the whole year. Well, I came back to the States to work. So I did keynotes in Portugal, in Florida, in South Carolina. So I came back and did some keynotes on the East Coast, and then did a bunch of virtual stuff. But I was never back home in Washington. Yeah.
In France, was there anything that you missed about Washington State or the United States? They were like I missed this, whatever it is.
I missed our community. We have a wonderful community in North Central Washington where we live. And we have a a wonderful church there that we love, and I love the people there. So I miss that a lot. But it was a very similar town in some regards. Like, it was a mountain town. We live in a mountain town. We lived in a mountain town in France. So there were some similarities there that were really nice. But yeah, that's probably about it.
How long have y'all been back?
We've been back for about a month.
Oh, just a month?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
what are things you missing about France already?
We miss the village culture most of all. I miss some people a lot. There are a number of people that we met that we love deeply, and we'll go back and visit. And certainly miss really good cheese, because there's really good cheese. And the village culture is different than like the city culture here, or the small town culture, even where we live, because you just walk into town and get a coffee, and then you stop by and pick up something for lunch. And our grocery bills were like 40% less than they were in the US. So it was a lot less expensive, even though we stopped by the store all the time. Great bread, great cheese, great wine. And just this sense of like, the church bells. I love the village bells in European villages, and this sense of this little community. It was just lovely. The village culture was really wonderful.
I don't think people who've never left the United States don't realize how much different and better the food is in overseas, right?
It's so much better.
And it's not even close. Like you go overseas, you taste the great food, you come back, you just taste the processed stuff here, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It is so good, so fresh, and all the food is like that, right?
It is.
Europe, Italy, France.
Oh, Italy's
Thailand,
better. Yeah.
It's like man, this is like, how come our food can't be like this in America?
Food, right? It's real food. It's not processed. Yeah, the processed stuff. I just am. Luckily, the place where we live, also in North Central Washington, I think is really big on the farm to table type thing, and lots of co-op type stuff and fresh food. And but the mountain food in France is actually not the best, right? It's like lots of cheese and potatoes, but some of the cheese is so good. So good.
So you're a big wine drinker?
Not a big wine drinker. I'm not. Nah, I feel like also over 50, right? Like it's just harder, right?
Yeah.
But French wine didn't give me a headache, like in the same way as wine from here does. But I enjoy wine. Yeah, I enjoy wine. Yeah.
Nice. So next, you'll talk about your company some, but can you go like more details, like how you started, what you're doing, what you're focused on now, what your big vision is for it?
Yeah, for the Grit Institute. Yeah, the big work with the Grit Institute right now is really to deploy this training a lot more widely. I know it's impactful, and I know it's incredible, and it's fun to have a chance to be able to be at Tuck a couple times a year at the business school, working in the material, so you can kind of see what resonates, what doesn't resonate, what can I tweak, what can I change, and so kind of have this constant evolution of that material. I'm also working on the next book, and then blowing out the training is really the thing. And that's the work. Yeah, that's the work. At home, we're going to start a Boy Scout troop and try to keep up with the boys. But work, it's really increasing the training so that is the primary revenue source within the Grit Institute. And that's my goal.
And so it's plan like you plan on scaling this. You plan like having like little like franchise over across the United States, where like you like bring on different coaches and you train them how to do your model, and like,
possibly
John Maxwell model, I guess.
Yeah, it's possible. That is not in the current plan, although it's possible. I do have affiliates that are working with me on deploying some of the training. There's a training that I worked on. So Going for Grit is one of the 2 trainings. It's 6 weeks. It's 6 weeks video supported, workbook supported, and it's probably, you give yourself 20 to 30 minutes a day. It follows the Grit Factor, essentially. The second training is Paths to Purpose, and that we've already talked about Paths to Purpose. So those are the 2 6-week training modules. And then this last year, I developed, at the request of now a partner called Scholastics, I developed a Going for Grit program for middle school and high schoolers. And I'm so incredibly excited about it. And it has a facilitator's guide with it. So that's intended to be in person, 45 to 50 minutes a day, either as an after-school program or part of a leadership program. And that facilitator's guide means that anybody, like I can give that to you, Jason, and say, Jason, you've got 5 minutes. You're going to go teach this cohort, and then you can walk in and teach that cohort. It gives you step-by-step instructions going through the day, and it's awesome. I thought it was going to be a kind of a light lift. I was like, I've got Going for Grit. I'll just kind of put it into a different format. It was a much heavier lift because I have kids that age. Like I know what they need to do. They need communication skills. They need active listening skills. We need to really build in like conflict resolution skills. So how do we build that into this curricula? And it's just awesome. So I'm talking to a school right now about putting that into practice, both the adult version for their faculty and then this other version for the middle school and high schoolers. And Scholastics is also pitching it to both after school programs as well as other school districts. And I'm super excited for that because kids need this more than they've ever needed it before.
So these facilitators, even though you like pretty much like give them the plan, right?
Yeah.
How do you like vet them, make sure they can actually do this for you, right?
It's up to them to make it work in the case of the schools.
Don't they make it look bad? They fail at it, you know what I'm saying?
It's a great question. Yeah, no, it's a great question.
So you sign on to them, right? So to speak, right? Where they totally messed it up and like, and it
Yeah.
comes back to your company.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. That hasn't been, because this is new, I don't anticipate it being a problem, but you're right, that is a risk, that it could be diluted in some way that way. I think that the schools will have they'll be invested in making sure that it's a success. And so hopefully they are also looking at this, they're choosing the facilitator appropriately, although it's again, built for anybody to be able to do it, and assuming a lower skilled facilitator. But you're right, that is a risk. That's a risk in the business. And that would argue for the potential for some training of coaches as well to be able to do this. The programs that are online are set up to be able to be run autonomously. So you could sign up for one and take one by yourself. Or a company could say, I want to take a cohort through, and then you'll have your own cohort kind of online platform to be able to chat and talk and interact back and forth. And it can be run at the company level, or I can be brought in for kind of a higher touch option to be able to do a kickoff webinar and maybe like a closing webinar as well.
So I think both programs like 6 weeks. Why 6 weeks? Just like, that's like 6 weeks, 4 hours a day, 3 hours a day, or it's like,
I don't know, it's like 20 to 30 minutes a day. I mean, you can put in more time if you wanted to, but and there's some suggestions for that if you wanted to put in more time. But no, it's meant that it's expecting that you're a working professional and that you are investing in yourself, or you're a company that's investing in people who are working and saying, hey, we want to give you additional skills, additional capabilities, additional tools to be able to go further. And so that's the assumption that we made when we developed the training.
Can you give us any tips you have on how to become a better public speaker?
Oh yeah. There's lots of practice, lots and lots of practice. It is good to work with a coach sometimes. I worked with a great lady named Connie Miller, who's from Seattle. She's fabulous. You can work with friends as well. There are various speaking agencies that will help you work on your public speaking. I would also say do the comparable work, which is to go look at other people who do a really good job, try to find examples of their speeches and watch them and analyze them and say, okay, now how do I want to incorporate this into the work that I do? Is there a way that this feels either natural or maybe this is one way I might work at it, this is another way. So it's looking at comparables really. And then it's just kind of doing some research, and then it's playing with it and practicing and practicing and practicing. You cannot practice enough.
So how do you do your schedule? Like all this stuff going on, like do you have a schedule, like, you know, like on like Fridays is this family, or Thursdays this, or do you just wake up every day like, or like for a better term, this wing it every day?
Yeah, no, it's so I keep my meetings primarily between Tuesdays and Thursdays. So if you have a calendar other than you who offered me a Saturday, but otherwise, if you called and wanted a meeting, or you email and want a meeting, and I will give you a block between Tuesday and Thursday, usually in the afternoons. That doesn't always work for East Coast clients or other overseas clients, and then we'll just be a lot more flexible. But generally speaking, it's in the afternoons, Tuesdays through Thursdays, and that allows me to do more creative work in the mornings, and that's the writing work and the other work. And then where I don't have calls, then that's where I can do administrative work and do my emails and do a little bit of social. I'm trying to be more strategic on social now, so I don't have to be on it as much. But it's also great, like especially LinkedIn, right, is a great place to engage. So that's how I think about it somewhat broadly. And I aspire to being a little bit more blocky in my schedules. So this is exactly when I do this. But the reality is, again, I've got kids. One of them is homeschooling this year. I have to be a bit more flexible. So,
yes.
Yeah.
So how do you do this? Like when you do your coaching, let me backtrack. What's your advice for someone who wants to get a coach? Like, how do they find the best coach for them?
I think ask around, honestly, get people's feedback on what experiences, which coach has worked for them, and then be specific on, because we all have a tendency to rationalize our own choices. So if I have a coach, I'm going to rationalize the fact that I am paying lots of money for this coach. So have some specific questions. Think in advance about, what do I want to get out of this coaching relationship? What would make a successful coaching relationship from my perspective? And then as you're interviewing people about either their coaching or others about their coaches, then ask those very specific questions and see what you can kind of tease out. But get specific instead of general about what it is that you want to get out of it. And then have an honest conversation with the coach once you get to that place, and interview that coach and say, hey, this is what I'm looking for. How do you work? And make sure that it's a good fit, because it won't necessarily always be a good fit. And that's okay, right? Any decent coach, any decent professional is going to be able to say, it's okay if it's not a perfect fit. We'll, find somebody that is. So
can you talk about the importance of having mentors and talk about either some of your mentors from the past or maybe any mentors you might have right now?
Mentorship is a place that I think it's really important. I hear that it's really important. The studies are that it's really important. I haven't had a mentor in the formal way that we talk about mentorship. And I sort of regret that. I have had people mentor me, and I'm grateful for that in all along the way, right? In different positions, from the military to corporate and beyond, and even today. I actually have thought recently that I would like to look more formally for somebody who might be a more strategic mentor. But just the mentorship in general, it's certainly, all of the studies are really clear that it's pretty important for success for most people. And that, for example, the women who stayed in the military and performed at very high levels, all will credit mentors for part of their success. And so I think that is both mentorship and ultimately sponsorship within the context of larger organizations is really, really important. And we do talk about this in the Grit Factor. I had a chance to interview Marsh Clark, who is a 2-time Purple Heart winner from Vietnam and is the mentor to Don Dunlop, who is a 2-star general in the Air Force, flew everything in the inventory. And they had a wonderful mentoring relationship. And that's they'll speak to the importance of chemistry in that relationship as well. So I guess it's still something that's aspirational for me, but I definitely did the research on it, and it's clearly worthwhile if you can make it work.
Now, are you mentoring anyone yourself?
I am not right now. I have had mentoring conversations with people when they've reached out. One young woman from Dartmouth, and actually the Grit Factor started because a young woman reached out and said, would I mentor her as she began the same journey that I had taken a number of years before? And then I said yes, and I was like, oh my gosh, but I just have this one experience. How can I scale what I offer to her? And if I do that work, scale the people to whom it's offered. And that was the genesis of what became the Grit Factor.
So grit, is this someone like you're basically born with? Or can you be taught grit, or like, but I guess the basic, born leader, learn leader, is grit the same way? Or like...
I think it's both and. I think so many things in life are both and. So I do always say, and I always I usually start a keynote by saying, a grit is not just for military pilots and big mountain climbers and Ironman triathletes, right? Grit is something that is innate to every single one of us. I do believe that. You have to find it. It has to be prompted for some of us. And sometimes we have to go back and build it, or we need to take advantage of opportunities where it can be built. And so it's really a both and thing. I think it's there's always opportunities to be better. And we do have it inside of ourselves somewhere, even when we can't always see it.
And for a company, I know you deal with any industry, but have you found like a certain industry, certain size revenue come to a certain like specific demographic that like resonates with what you're doing more than others?
Not really. I mean, I think that would be great, actually, because I could target and reach out to them more easily, right? I've spoken with a lot of pharmaceutical companies, so I think that has been a place that it resonates. I will often speak to women's groups within mostly male companies, or veterans groups within larger companies, larger tech companies. Technology is another place that it really resonates. There's such a quick pace of change. There's often challenges bringing minorities into leadership roles, that sort of thing, especially women. And honestly, it seriously does apply to every industry. I think places that really resonate with military stories in particular can also be kind of more old school industries like packaging companies, or kind of more industrial and construction and that sort of thing. But honestly, it really just it really is across industries and across sectors, and I'm grateful for that, because I love the variety of that.
Yes. So for your company, you talk about scaling in the future, right?
Yeah.
How do you know it's time to scale? Like, how do you know it's time to put the fuel on the fire, so to speak?
I think when you're maxed out as a single person, right? You're maxed out. Like I know that because of what I want to be able to manage in the rest of my life, I'm not going to travel more than twice a month. So I'm not scalable, right? I'm a single person. That was actually the impetus to start to develop these courses, to say, how do I offer this to a much larger group of people, knowing that I can only travel at a certain fee twice a month? And these courses are available for a fraction of that and go even deeper into that. So if I can scale that, then that's actually the purpose of enabling success in other people so that we can all contribute our best to the world, right? It's building courageous leaders for a better world. That's the mission of the Grit Institute. And in order to do that, how do I scale that? Well, I can do things online. I can make training available online. I can write the books where more people can read these things and be able to go forward. So I think it's when you realize that you are maxed out on what you can do, it's time to scale and make sure that that mission can be met in other ways.
So do you see yourself increasing your travel time once your kids are out of the house?
No,
No.
Because I still want to write.
Okay.
I mean, the writing and the research, the creation part of the work is really important to me. Again, it's what I didn't feel like I had in the military. And I need that time. So I know I won't travel more than that.
Okay.
That's going to be it.
That's like what's the word? Red line in the sand, so to speak.
It's not, yeah. I mean, I would also say like, August, you often don't travel,
Yeah.
right? December, maybe like the early part of the month, but not usually later. So maybe there's 3 engagements in November and there's 1 in December or something. So it ends up averaging out to that. Yeah.
So how good opportunity would have to be for you to like go over this? Like so when somebody say like, I want you to come speak at all the VPs of IBM for a $500 fee or like,
oh, I would do that. Yeah, I would do that. No, I mean, I think you're always balancing, not because I'm willing to, I don't think that violates a value. That just says, okay, how do we manage like both the business requirements that that I need to produce for our family?
And obviously you don't want to pass a business opportunity because you have this like strict guideline.
No. Right. But at the same time, there are speakers who want to be on the road 300 days a year, and that's not me.
That's insane.
That's not me. I mean, and maybe they love it and that's awesome, but that's not who I'm going to be. So I'm going to be more careful. Yeah.
So is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't, or anything else you want to talk about?
Oh boy, we did pretty well. Yeah. Nice job. Yeah, seriously.
Thanks.
No, I don't think so. This has been fantastic. I really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Can you share your social media so people can reach out to you?
Sure. Yeah. I'm at shannonpolson.com, ShannonPolson.com. Also at thegritinstitute.com, on LinkedIn at Shannon H. Polson, Instagram at Shannon H. Polson, and on YouTube at the Grit Institute. So I'd love to see you on any or all of those. Please subscribe to this Facing the Wind at Substack, and subscribe on all of the social channels. And I'd love to interact with you and hear what you have to say.
Shannon, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason. I loved our conversation.
And so listeners, thank you for your time as well. Remember to be great every day.